Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. Adriana Smith was one of those girls who in Soviet times would have been described as a Komsomol girl, a student, an athlete, and simply beautiful. But since Adriana was born a year after the collapse of the Soviet Union, any Komsomol was out of the question. Everything else was pure truth. The girl studied at the psychological faculty of the university, respected sports, and not just respected, and in her free time went to the gym and conquered guys with her gorgeous figure and exquisite beauty. Her green, slightly slanted eyes put on associations with the witches Rusalka and Undina, and her waist-length golden brown hair completed the impression. There was no shortage of admirers, but the heart of the young beauty was taken in the first year of university. Its happy owner was James, a law student. The guy was a year older. Excuse me, can you tell me where the third bakery is? He heard the melodious voice of a beautiful freshman one day and realized he was lost. Come on, I'll show you, James offered with a smile, and the girl nodded gratefully. On the way to the bakery, young people met and the same day realized that they were made for each other. After receiving his diploma, James got a job at the tax office. The salary was impressive, and the young specialist thought about making Adriana an offer. And why not? After all, after a year, James was already on his feet and therefore could provide for his family. I will propose when James gets his diploma. He shared his plans with his parents, and they quite approved of his son's decision. They were fine with Adriana. She's not a bride. She's a miracle, said Betty, James's mother. She's a clever girl and a beauty and a good housekeeper. Don't you dare miss her. I'm not going to, replied the son with a smile. It was done. Adriana received her diploma and James made the girl an offer, which she gladly accepted. The young employee of the tax service decided not to save money on the wedding. The celebration was fun, crowded, and very beautiful. It seemed that there would be a lot of happiness ahead, but life often presents surprises, which, unfortunately, are not always pleasant. No matter how many spouses tried to conceive a child, they did not succeed. James and Adriana bypassed a lot of doctors, but all to no avail. The young woman became depressed. Don't worry, kitten, James said. I love you. And that's the most important thing. The rest will come. But then a lot of women have changed when they've lost all sense of Christina. So as long as we're alive, not all is lost. Yes, Adriana smiled weakly. You're probably right. She tried not to despair, but apparently she wasn't trying hard enough. One day, after another failed attempt to get pregnant, she'd snapped at James for the first time, even though she couldn't blame him. That night her husband didn't come home for the first time. And then things escalated. Adriana had no time to look back, and the spouses' sleepovers outside the house became a regular occurrence. In 3 months, Adriana came home and found in the marital bed a pretty blonde girl. It was a girl, because the latter is unlikely to have marked the age of majority too young. About such usually say young as early. Once Adriana sincerely thought that such situations are possible only in bad anecdotes, but not in life. Turns out she was wrong. No, she didn't make a jealous scene. Why humiliate herself? Oh no, that's not Adriana Smith. She just turned around and went back to her parents' house. A week later, James stood on her parents' doorstep. I'm sorry, he said, handing Adriana a bouquet of tulips. I don't know if I can, she replied, looking thoughtfully at her husband. You try. Barely audible, James said. God knows she tried to appear calm, but she couldn't hold back the tears. Her husband held Adriana close to him and stroked her hair. Sha, it's okay. That same day, Adriana returned to James. The family idyll lasted exactly a month. That is, until Adriana, returning from work, accidentally saw her husband with her good acquaintance. James and Christina were sitting in a cafe holding hands. Adriana was tempted to run to the cafe. Yeah, and pulling Christina's hair. Yeah, and just as long as it didn't hurt. But after a minute, Adriana thought, no, we'll go another way. That evening, when they were both home, she said without offense that she'd seen the whole thing. Adriana had subconsciously hoped that James would say that it had been a chance encounter and purely friendly. But nothing of the sort had happened. Yes, her husband replied with a sigh. I should have told you about it earlier. Christina and I love each other. How long have you had this? Asked the young woman, Drogba in your voice. Not long, shrugged James. What difference does it make? Really no sobbing. And I don't remember myself running out into the street. And then there was a divorce with all the ensuing consequences in the form of the division of the apartment, the division of property, and the news of Christina's pregnancy. That was a low blow. Calm down. You're gonna be fine. Adriana's friend Kathy tried to talk some sense into Adriana. With such a beauty, you will not be alone for long. But Adriana just shook her head. She didn't believe anyone else. And in the back of her mind, somewhere in the very bottom of her mind, Christina glimmered that James would come back. But he'd forgotten all about Adriana. Her classmate Clara, who was not particularly tactful, said that James and Christina are happy, walking through the park, holding hands. And your ex was like a faithful dog, pouring it all over her face. Holding hands, she thought. Just like that time in the cafe. And out loud she said, Slaga, I'm sorry, but I'm not interested. Adriana worked as a school psychologist, but now she felt like a cobbler without boots. She herself needed the help of a specialist. So the principal suggested that Adriana take a week off. The young woman gladly accepted the offer. She went to the base where she walked a lot and read books. Of course, men tried to court her, but Adriana only guffawed. What's in store for the prince? The week flew by like a day. On the way back to the city, Adriana feared she'd be depressed again, but she didn't. She went back to work. Life went on as usual, and it seemed like an early start to life. But one day Adriana was walking down the street and saw Christina with a stroller. The young woman became hysterical. She sat down on a bench and began to scream. Are you sick? A man asked her sympathetically. About 25 years old. I think so, nodded Adriana. Only you don't have to worry about that. But why didn't the young man agree, handing her a small bottle of mineral water? We're all human. Sometimes it's good to talk it out. And a stranger would be better for that purpose than a best friend. Adriana remembered how Clara had poured salt on her wound. That was when she realized that the young man's words had some merit. Adriana also realized that she really needed to talk. After all, her friends didn't really care about her problems. But then, why should a strange man care about them? Well, he offered himself as a shoulder to cry on. By the way, my name is William. The man introduced himself with a smile. Adriana trustingly, she smiled back. So what is your problem, Adriana? William asked softly. It's just hard to imagine that such a beautiful girl could have serious problems. She could, she sighed, and told her sad story. What can I say? The young man waved his hands. We all walk under God, and no one knows what will happen tomorrow, the day after tomorrow in a week. There is no need to despair. And your husband? Well then, that's not the man you were going to get along with. Maybe, Adriana nodded. But to be honest, it doesn't make me feel any better. Time heals. William shrugged and winked. You know what you need right now. And what's to get drunk? I'm sorry, get drunk what? Repeated the new acquaintance. Actually, I don't drink. So I laughed too, he laughed. But there's a first time for everything, isn't there? So let's go to the bar. A toast to getting to know each other. Let's go. She made up her mind. That day, Adriana drank herself into oblivion for the first time. And the next morning, she woke up in her own apartment, realizing that someone was lying next to her. The young woman cried out. It was William. What are we doing up? Fun, he asked, opening his eyes. I'm that. And you and I are what? William gave a funny shout. And a second later, Adriana laughed infectiously. But actually, last night at the bar, we got into a you versus me thing. Yeah, not really, she mumbled embarrassedly. But we did. The young woman was silent, and William said seriously, Adriana, we are adults. What happened is what happened. But if you're so uncomfortable, I can leave, and you'll never see me again. Adriana was silent. She suddenly realized that I didn't want to. I must admit that William turned out to be an attentive and interesting conversationalist. And most importantly, it was much easier in his company. According to William, he was a freelancer, but when asked what he does, William answered a little bit of everything. Sometimes I work with advertising agencies, repair cars, phones, and stuff like that. I see, nodded Adriana. A few months later, William proposed to Adriana. They signed without witnesses and other wedding tinsel. And then they moved on to married life. This time, the absence of children did not bother Adriana too much. Either she had gotten over her desire to be a mother, or she had the impression that William did not pay any attention to it. But the fact remained. Sometimes Adriana wondered how much William would be enough. She waited for her husband to talk about children, but it never happened. What happened was much worse. One day, Adriana came home from work and found the young woman in her kitchen. And you pardon me, who was taken aback, Adriana? And I smiled, stranger. Camille. I mean, it's a pleasure. My name is Adriana. You must be related to William. Yeah, I guess I am. Camille nodded. I didn't see you at the wedding. Adriana said, I wasn't there, but I'm going to live here now. Didn't William say he was planning to file for divorce? Are you kidding? Adriana exclaimed. Camille shrugged her shoulders. You get a divorce, and I'll live here with William. What do you mean here? This is my apartment, but my Lachka was yours and now she's ours, grinned the intruders. Do you want to see the papers? Adriana already sensed something wrong, but she said please. And when Adriana saw the document, according to which the apartment now belongs to William, her eyes went black. It was nothing more than a deed of gift. Based on its contents, it appeared that Adriana had given her apartment as a gift. You see, Camille said triumphantly, William's apartment, and you have almost no rights to it. I say almost, because it's a matter of time. Are you all lying? Shouted Adriana. This document is a fake. I'm going to call Yura now. Yes, please, sniggered the rival. And hearing the rattle of the key in the keyhole, added, and here, by the way, he is, so no need to call anyone. But I see you've already met him, said William with a wicked smile. And Adriana realized with horror that everything this Camille had said was true. William, what does that mean? She demanded an explanation. It means, my dear, that you are nobody in this apartment, and your name is nothing. I'm filing for divorce, and Camille will live here now. Well, I think she's already filled you in on that. But for what? Adriana whispered. Tears welled up in her eyes. Why not? William shrugged. You want to live. You've got to get your head around it. And if you don't want to be evicted from here with the police, you'd better pack your things and vacate the premises. And I'm still your wife. Squeezing it out like that, nodded the husband. But it's a matter of 1 month. Will it make any difference? I guess not. This is my woman, and you're not here. And smirked, added, or do you want to be the third? I didn't know you were such a drag. What kind of scumbag are you? Adriana shook her head. But that's just the way it is. The young woman realized she had nothing more to do here. She went to pack her things, but then William remarked approvingly, I always knew you were a smart girl. Adriana packed her suitcase and left the apartment. But where to go? Her parents were so happy that after the divorce, which had not been easy for their daughter, she had managed to organize her personal life and finally become a victim of a con artist. And where to go? Adriana thought feverishly. The young woman sat on a bench and caught the pitying glances of people passing by. She looked very unhappy indeed. The young woman wanted to forget from her longing. Adriana went to Kathy, who lived nearby. "Did you go to the police?" asked her friend. "No," she shook her head. "I hadn't thought about it. And you should have. The document seems to be authentic." Adriana said in despair, "That's not a fact. In any case, it should be checked. Here's the thing. You, of course, cried, but go to the police tomorrow morning." "I'll do that." A visit to the police turned up nothing. What can I say? The officer, whose name was Noah, "You've just been scammed out of your apartment. I figured that out without you," Adriana said sadly. "But what to do? The document can be checked for authenticity." "Of course it's important," said the policeman. "But for that, we need a warrant. What's the problem?" The young woman started to get agitated. "And you do not yell at me, or you get involved with the wrong people. And then you tell us how to do our jobs." "I'm sorry." Adriana decided it was better not to make the policeman angry, or God forbid, he'd refuse to take the case. "What's the big deal?" He waved his hand. "So that's that. Now I'll give you some pictures of marriage and apartment swindlers. What if your husband is among them?" The policeman laid out some photos in front of the young woman. "Is that him?" Adriana exclaimed. "That's William." "Are you sure?" "Well, you know, I lived with this man for a year. The thing is, this man is known to us." As Charles told the policeman, "You're not the first person he's dumped on an apartment, are you?" "And what's with the dropped voice?" asked Adriana. "What are my chances of getting my apartment back?" "We'll try to do our best," Noah replied evasively. She just sighed. It sounded, to put it bluntly, not very encouraging. But there was nothing to do. "Come up tomorrow at 10:00, and we hope for an apartment," added Vason. "Well," nodded Adriana, and walked out of the office. She was scared to even think that she could be left on the street. Adriana's parents were living in one. She didn't want to embarrass them, or even upset them. "So what did the police tell you?" Kathy asked when Adriana got back. "Nothing concrete yet." She sighed and told them about the visit. "Yes, friend. I don't envy you," Kathy said sympathetically. "But let's hope for the best." Let's hope for the best. But the hopes for the future were not realized. The document turned out to be the most authentic, and the policemen could only throw up their hands. "But is there nothing that can be done?" Adriana asked. "Is there no way to prove that I lived here? After all, this apartment was given to me as a result of the exchange after the divorce." "An exchange?" "Divorce," grinned Vason. "Not a boring life, citizen. And for the future, I recommend to be more careful in choosing a life partner. And do not get involved with anyone. Everything will be like people." Adriana realized that the police just don't want to spoil the statistics with another case. But maybe there were other ways to get the apartment back. Kathy pondered. "There must be evidence that you and your ex-spouse are exchanging the apartment. Would you just give up?" "Who told you that?" But it didn't turn out to be that simple. Apparently, William Charles was a master con artist. There's a reason this Vason guy said Adriana wasn't his first victim. There was no record of the apartment being exchanged. The deed of gift in William's name was authentic. What was there to do? Only go to her parents and tell them everything. After all, Kathy had a boyfriend, Benjamin, who was looking at the beautiful young lodger with marked interest. "Adriana, I understand and sympathize with you. But you have to understand," Kathy said. "Yes, I understand," Adriana replied and went to pack her things. But trouble does not come alone. A few days after the young woman moved in with her parents at Sebastian's, her father began severe heart pain, a massive heart attack. The doctor said he could not be saved. And after 40, Sebastian's mom Cindy quietly passed away in her sleep. "It's my fault," Adriana lamented. "It was because of my problems that Daddy and Mommy were gone." And again the apartment issue. The one-room apartment where Adriana's parents lived had turned out to be disputed, and she had been asked to leave it. But how come? She asked an employee of the city administration. "You see, I have nowhere else to go, and you think it's my problem." arrogantly said a burly middle-aged woman. Then Adriana realized it was a dead end. It couldn't get any worse. The young woman left the apartment and went wherever she was looking. And they were looking nowhere. Adriana had some money left, enough to rent a small house in the private sector, but she decided not to spend it. So the young woman moved into a social hotel for people in difficult life situations. But however she got there, she became a real homeless person. No residence registration, no place of her own. On top of that, Adriana was fired from school. Nothing personal. The principal said, "But I don't want any problem employees." Nice one. The psychologist lives in a social hotel. David, but I need something to live on. The girl said in despair, "I'll find something." Fine, he nodded. When you think of something, then come back. I'm sure you won't have any trouble getting a job. Adriana, I'll be perfectly frank. Personally, I like you very much. But there's such a thing as the image of an institution. It's gotten to the point where students are whispering about you. So I'm sure the hotel will take good care of you. You won't starve to death. I heard you, Adriana replied. I won't spoil the image of the school. Have a good day. Having said that, the young woman left. And when she left the principal's office, she really felt the mocking looks of her colleagues and students. God, until when will fate test my strength? Adriana thought sadly. She went back to the hotel and sat down on the flimsy sofa, covering her face with her hands. Adriana thought back to everything. The former husband of the con man William Charles, the check-in at the social hotel, and finally the dismissal. Did something happen to you? Kelly asked, a friend in distress. Kelly was a victim of black realtors. Just like Adriana, she trusted a charming man, and that man threw the young woman out on the street in the winter cold. And if it wasn't for the hotel staff passing by on a raid, Kelly wouldn't be alive anymore. What happened? Adriana asked personally again. Nothing. Except I don't have a place to live, and now I've lost my job. What's a job got to do with it? Because I'm ruining the school's image with my unenviable status. Adriana grinned wryly and told Kelly about her conversation with the principal. Those bastards, she exclaimed. No, Adriana sighed. It's much simpler than that. It's every man for himself. And there's nothing you can do about it. That's true, Kelly nodded. And noticing a strand of hair on Adriana's shoulder, she said, Is your hair coming out? Must be nervous. In the morning, they woke up to screaming, fire, burning. That's all they needed. The smell of burning was getting stronger and stronger, and people were running for the exits. Don't panic, don't panic, the hotel director exhorted the guests. The inn burned to the ground. Now Adriana and the other residents had only one way out. As long as Adriana had money, she lived in a hostel. But that ran out, and the young woman was forced onto the streets. No money, no place to live. The receptionist said, Well, maybe I can do some work. I'm not afraid of any work. We don't practice such things, answered the employee and defiantly began to write something in a notebook. From time to time, looking at the screen, standing in front of her laptop. Well, thank you. Adriana answered with a sigh and headed for the exit. Wait, the receptionist called out to her. You say you're not afraid of any job. There's a hospice a block away. Maybe they'll take you there to take care of the sick, for bed and board. See if you can apply there. Thank you. The young woman nodded and left the table. I understand and sympathize with you. But the staff is full, said the head of the hospice. But you have to understand. A psychology degree is good, of course, but we already have a psychologist. We can't help everyone who needs help. After all, this isn't a labor exchange. But maybe I could be a backup. Lyra insisted. There was no choice. I won't take up much space, and I'm not shy. There was a knock on the door, and the manager said, Excuse me, we don't need to work. A young and elegantly dressed man entered the office. Hello, Mason. The superintendent smiled cordially. What are you doing here? Hello, Benjamin. With dignity replied Vezet. I need to talk to you. Are you still here? The superintendent frowned, looking at the liar. I think I made myself clear. I'm sorry, the young woman said quietly and left the office. Adriana took the hallway, wondering if there was another social hotel in town. There was no money on the phone, so she couldn't monitor the city for it. Adriana was already approaching the exit when suddenly she was called by iWait. The young woman turned around and saw the same young man with whom she met in the office of the head of the hospice. Are you for me? She asked. Yes, you are. The stranger nodded with a smile. Benjamin said you had a problem. And who doesn't? Bitterly, Adriana grinned. I think I can help you, the man said. My name is Mason. You've heard, though. Well, I'd like to offer you a live-in job. You want to offer me a job? The young woman asked in disbelief. But yes, in general. But I can't pay much. It's a business problem. But food and a roof over my head are all guaranteed. Frankly, it was all too good to be true, and to say I've been burned twice is no joke. Maybe this is the one they're talking about. God loves a trinity. But on the other hand, there were no other options, unless she went to the street, where she actually was now. What's your name? Mason asked. My name is Adriana, answered the young woman. Adriana smiled like a singer. Well, you could say that. Adriana smiled shyly. You know what? Adriana winked. Mason, you're much prettier, really. The young woman was embarrassed. She had already forgotten that men happened to compliment women. For her, it was somewhere else in her life. So how about my proposal? Asked Mason. But you didn't tell me what I should do. Adriana pointed out reasonably. Oh yes, I'm sorry. And the thing you were trying to get hospice care for. My mother needs a caregiver, but first I would ask you to tell me what happened to you. The young woman was uncomfortable telling the story of being the victim of a con artist. So Adriana confined herself to the story of divorce, the loss of her parents, and the recognition of their housing as disputed. Well, I think I can help you, Longman said. After listening to her story, unlike most divorced women of the Soviet era, Betty Longman was not the least bit complex about it. She would never live with a man on the principle that he was not good, but mine. She was more familiar with the principle that it was better to starve than to eat anything. After studying for a year and a half with an alcoholic with criminal tendencies, Betty showed Ivan the door, and then she did not hesitate to file for divorce. She later learned that her ex-brother-in-law had gone to jail for burglary. I just shrugged my shoulders, and I shouldn't have raised my son. And the rest of it was such a load of crap. Betty worked as a dispatcher at the trolley park. The pay wasn't bad, but you can't have too much money, especially if you're a divorced woman with a child. And the young woman took a second job as a hospital nurse. The young mother was exhausted, but she knew that the little mommy would not need anything. Betty cared not that the child was fed, clothed, shoe, but also about his leisure time. From the first grade, Mason went to 2 sports sections on swimming and basketball. Later, the boy became interested in chess, and of course, his mother did not neglect his computer literacy. The boy grew up erudite and well-rounded, and Betty was happy about it. Besides, she was proud of the fact that Mason Longman was a good-looking guy and enjoyed success among the girls. Betty didn't skimp on her son's entertainment either. Mom, but this is the most expensive nightclub, shook his head when Betty presented him with a flyers for his 16th birthday, a concert by a popular band. So, is it fun? Asked his mother. We lived once, and you had fun. It's kind of shameful, replied the guy. You work, live and work hard, and I have fun. Well, when to do it, if not when you're young? Betty objected. Some of the relatives and friends of the family had told Ethan that, look, don't let it get you down. But it didn't. When it came time to think about education, Mason said that he decided to enter the Faculty of Economics. In the future, I want to devote my life to business. He explained his choice. The competition is crazy, Betty remarked. Mother, do you really doubt me? No, the woman shrugged. But as far as I know, to get into the economics department, you need goodwill and a lot of money. Mom, I've already thought about it, Mason said. I'm gonna work part-time. And where are you going to work part-time? Betty chuckled. Where will they take you? I've already been hired, he smiled. At a restaurant as a waiter. Oh, come on. That's the truth. And if I have time, I'll work as a promoter or a courier. I could use a part-time job right now. Well, part-time work only strongly not overwork with a sigh, said the mother, automatically taking hold of the heart. The mother, frightened, asked Mason, Are you feeling okay? Yes, I'm fine. Right. Mason got a job as a waiter. It paid well, plus tips. The day ended when the last customer left, which sometimes went past 0 o'clock. After such shifts, Mason needed a truly Herculean effort not to fall asleep for lessons. On Saturdays and Sundays, he worked part-time as a promoter or handed out publications of an advertising nature. It was hard as hell, but the thought of studying economics and then becoming a businessman warmed his soul. Some people said that you don't have to study for 5 years to be a businessman. Listen to a course on the basics of entrepreneurship and all that, said Liam's school friend Mason. No, I want to study everything thoroughly, not grab the top. Shook his head at me. Liam, grandiose plans. 5 years of being a student flew by much faster than it seemed to Mason at first. The boy faithfully attended all lectures, took an active part in seminars and colloquiums, but he couldn't wait to get a diploma and make the first steps in business. Sometimes Mason thought that Liam was probably right, and such difficulties were really unnecessary. He knew a lot of double majors who started earning good money almost after school. However, being a perfectionist, the guy wanted everything to be, as he put it, by his wits. And here he is, a young economist, full of the most daring plans, proudly shows his mother a red diploma. What am I going to say? Betty smiled. Well done, and you deserve encouragement. What do you want? I'm a mom. I just want to get rich and take you to a fancy restaurant. No more, no less. Humorist. The parent laughed. I'm more serious than ever. This will be the best encouragement. There was no money to start my own business. Therefore, the first pressing issue was employment. For a whole month, Mason went around to organizations, but in vain. We need a candidate with experience in the field, he answered, in 10 companies. The remaining 2 promised to call him. Eventually, Mason managed to get a job at a young grocery company, and his business took off. As soon as management had the opportunity to pay employees more, they didn't fail to do so. After a year, Mason decided to go freelance. I'm sorry to part with you, Kevin said as he signed the application. It was a pleasure working with you, too, Mason replied sincerely. But I've been dreaming of my own business since high school. Well, may it work out for you, nodded the now ex-boss. What are you going to do, if it's no secret? No, it's no secret. I'm gonna open a real estate agency. Oh, really? Kevin said respectfully. I think so too, smiled Mason. And if you need to buy, sell, or exchange real estate, I'd be happy to help. I will, laughed the manager. And good luck. Thank you. And you too, Longman replied, after which the men exchanged a firm handshake. Amcor Real Estate Agency started to turn a profit after a couple of months. Of course, it was a long way from fabulous wealth. But Mason had every reason to be proud of himself. He'd made it. And what was to come? On the day of his mother's 45th birthday, Mason handed her a luxurious bouquet of dark pink roses and said, Mom, now we'll buy you the most gorgeous evening dress we can find. And tonight we're going to a nice restaurant. How about that? Oh, Mason, but that would be expensive, Betty said. Why don't we cook something at home? We'll have guests over and remember what you once said to me in response to a similar phrase. With a laugh he asked that we only live once, so we go to a restaurant and don't argue with me. Thank goodness I can afford it now. They went to an expensive boutique and bought for Betty a stunning dress, sparkling with trips of cobalt blue and beautifully revealing her slender figure. And in the evening, mother and son went to a cozy country restaurant and sat gloriously, promised to take you out to a restaurant at least twice a year on your birthday. And on March 8th, solemnly said the son, "Do you want to spoil me?" With a laugh asked Betty, touched by her son's words. "That's exactly what Mason confirmed. You used to spoil me. Now it's my turn." The agency still fed Mason and his staff heartily, but it wasn't enough for him. So Longman started thinking about opening a new branch, and he succeeded. "Mason," Betty said at dinner one night, "I was talking to Aunt Bailey today, and she asked if you could find some work for her, Michael." At the mention of his cousin, Mason snorted incredulously. How long had he remembered Michael? He'd always wanted easy money. After high school, Mason's cousin had enrolled in a technical school to study software engineering. Michael reasoned that programmers made good money. What is his truth? Except that Michael forgot about one thing. In order to earn this very good money, you must first learn and start working. As a result, Michael was expelled after the first session, and then the failed programmer tried to earn money. However, the ways of earning money did not inspire confidence and looked more like fraud. "What are you doing all this fooling around?" Mason once said. "Try to get back into tech, or go somewhere else. But there's no easy money in it." But Michael wasn't interested in any reasonable arguments. He wanted it all. "Fortune is fickle," shrugged his cousin. "One day there is none, and the next day there will be." "Why wouldn't they?" Mason asked reasonably. "One should be able to wait admonitively," Michael replied. And then word got out that he'd started gambling. The guy had money, and Michael said to Mason, "Well, I told you, Vital. Even an amateur like me knows that you get a beginner hooked on winning first, and once they get the hang of it, they start losing." Mason grinned mirthfully. "Why not?" Michael objected. "If you think with your head, everything will be fine." And soon Mason's prediction came true. Michael owed a large sum to some criminal authority, and the guy was in serious trouble. Aunt Valia, Betty's sister, came to her nephew and banged at his feet. "Spells help a brother. I won't survive if anything happens to him." Mason helped. What's there to do? What's the ritual? He generously lent the money, noting that it was time to start earning his own money. And now, a year after this story, Michael seems ripe or desperate to find a magical way to make serious money. "Can you think of anything?" Betty asked. "Probably," Mason replied after a little thought. "But I can't guarantee fabulous money. He's got no education, no skills, and have him come back tomorrow morning." To be honest, he didn't really believe Michael would come. But he did, and he miraculously agreed to take the office manager's job. Mason had no idea what it would cost him to help him get his cousin hired. To Mason's surprise, Michael faithfully performed the duties of office manager. Growing up, Longman noted. And a few months later, Mason went to his personal account to pay the tax and whizzed out of the company's accounts more than half of the amount to pay the tax, of course enough. But what to do next? It was supposed that all available assets would be used for the development of the branch and some needs of the head office, and there was no money. Mason refused to believe it, but the truth was obvious. The missing money was clearly Michael's doing. Had he really started gambling again? Depressed, Longman thought and dialed the receptionist's number. "Katya, would you be so kind as to get Michael for me?" "Okay," Mason shouted the receptionist. Michael came up about 10 minutes later. "What's the matter?" he asked. "Charles, is there something you want to tell me?" It was obvious from his cousin's face that he wanted to lie that he didn't understand anything. So Mason decided to take the bull by the horns. Don't let him think that being related gives Michael the right to do whatever he wants. He wants to work for his health. No, so he's Mason. He's not holding anyone back. "Michael, are you playing with metal in your voice again?" he asked. "I'm not." "But you're the one who took most of the money out of the accounts," Mason interrupted. "Did you owe someone again?" Michael fell silent, slurring. "Is that what you needed this job for?" Longman stated, "You know, I can forgive anything but stealing from my own. That's called fatherland. After all, if you had a problem, you could have told me about it instead of hacking into the computer to steal company money. So now you're going to fire me." Mason nodded. "I'm sorry, brother, but I can't trust you." A few days later, a police officer visited the office. Longman Mason asked the employee upon entering his office. "Yes, that's me," politely replied the office owner. "What can I do for you?" "We've received a report that a company is running an apartment scam," said the police officer. "What is this nonsense?" Mason exclaimed, "My company has an impeccable reputation. We've been through a lot of transactions. Yes, you should read the reviews about our firm on the internet. There's never been a scam." "We'll take care of it," said the law enforcement officer. "You'll have to come with us." "But I cannot," Mason said in desperation. "I have a meeting with a client in 20 minutes. "I don't think so." The policeman grinned. "The company's office will be sealed until the circumstances are clarified." The next 2 weeks were a living hell. Mason was shown several documents according to which people were transferring housing to other people. The papers were authentic and drawn up in the office of the real estate agency Comcor. Mason couldn't help but realize that apartment scams, like theft, were the work of a cousin. "I should have known what he needed the job for," he berated himself. But what's the use? The important thing now was not to go to jail. Betty's health left a lot to be desired. And who but Mason would take care of her? Longman's lawyer had done a good job. He managed to get a logical forensics count, and Mason's signature was found to be forged. He was eventually released on his own recognizance. As for Michael, he lay low, and therefore it was not possible to attract him. And where's the obvious evidence of his guilt? Anyway, Mason's firm lost its sterling reputation. Clients became noticeably less, and one day Mason was forced to declare bankruptcy. It could have been worse. Mr. Longman is alive, well and free. The rest will follow. Except Mom. No matter how hard Mason tried to hide his problems from Betty, she found out. All things secret, as you know, come to light. And the earth is full of rumors. But how could it be? Her mother said in a stricken voice, "He's your brother." "Unfortunately, Mom," Mason replied with a bitter smile. "For some people, nothing is sacred. I can't get my head around it. Just a poor woman." Betty took what happened to her son too personally and became ill. She had trouble walking, talking, and caring for herself. That's why it didn't require a caregiver. Mason still had some money to spare and hired a caregiver from an agency. 3 months, he figured. And then, God willing, I'd find a decent job. Mason, as a young man who used to work as a courier promoter, he did not mind unloading railcars offered in the store as a loader. As for more monetary and stable work, her search has not yielded any results. The story of the scandal in Odessa real estate office flew all over the city, and no one wanted to deal with Mason. He was very much on the wrong side of the throat. Young but promising businessman. Maybe some of his old contacts knew Mason was innocent. But such acquaintances either did not want to compromise themselves in the eyes of other representatives of the business community, or did not want Longman, once a strong competitor, to rise from its knees. Victoria, whom Mason was dating at the time, stopped returning his calls, and because she said she loved money. "She did," said Betty, who had always disliked Vika. "She loves money," said Betty, who always disliked Vika. Money was running low and bursting. Rich realized that next month he would have nothing to pay the caregivers with. Betty, meanwhile, was quietly fading away, and the doctors only spread their hands. The result of severe stress, in one voice, said, plus not very healthy heart. The main thing is to regularly take the prescribed drugs of calmness and observe bed rest, but also appropriate care. Here, the appropriate care came into question. After all, it required an investment, and they needed something to eat as well. Mason feverishly considered his options and finally came up with one. He decided to contact the hospice, which supervised, Perhaps Benjamin will match him with a specialist who will agree to work for a moderate fee, food and a roof over his head. He was helping us, wasn't he? But Benjamin seemed to think otherwise. Oh, really? The hospice director exclaimed. I hire highly qualified people. My staff won't work for less than that. Benjamin tore off the sticker and wrote the amount for which he said his subordinates were willing to work. Mason couldn't afford it, but we can't say his trip to the hospice was in vain. You know what? Exclaimed the master of the office. Did you see from me? Now the lady was coming out of her pocket and remembered the young woman whom Benjamin had apparently turned away. And I nodded. She offered me her services for food and a corner, said the superintendent. I don't have any vacancies. The woman is in a difficult situation. And anyway, if you are interested, you can catch up with her and offer her a job. Thank you, Mason replied, and quickly walked out of the office, thinking that with mercy at the staff of hospices and other similar places is tight. However, if you think hard enough, you can hardly blame them for that. Police officers, ritualists, surgeons, and many others touch human grief almost every day. It's their job. And if you sympathize with everyone, it won't last long. But Longman has helped so much with this hospice that the superintendents could have come up with some variant for him. Although, in fact, he only came up with one if it was worthwhile. Mason was lucky. The young woman Benjamin was talking about hadn't left yet, and when Longman called out to her and the stranger turned around, he realized that this girl needed help. Her eyes were so beautiful, but so sad, it made the former owner of the real estate office's heart ache. But first, the business part of the conversation. The negotiations had taken place. Mason and her mother lived in a small but very nice cottage. Adriana entered the house and immediately felt like pinching herself. Am I really going to live in this house? The young woman thought, not believing her happiness. Let me show you to your room first, Mason suggested. And then I'll introduce you to your mom. Okay, Mason nodded to Adriana. It's just Mason, he smiled. I'm not that old. Adriana just shrugged. The room she'd be staying in was sunny and bright, cozy and spacious, especially after the social hotel in Hosta. Adriana thought with a sigh. Just what will happen next? Will it be my destiny to wander around in other people's houses from now on? Do you like it? Asked the owner of the cottage. Yes, Adriana nodded, wondering if he was joking. It was clear that a man who had asked for hospice care would be happy in any conditions. A room on the second floor of the cottage was something she couldn't even dream of. Well, that's fine, Mason smiled. Perhaps you'd like a bath. I wouldn't say no, the young woman muttered embarrassedly. The baths are down the hall, said the employer unexpectedly, and added in a changing tone after the engagement, I can offer only a man's robe. Thank you. Adriana nodded with a shy smile. When was the last time I had such a luxurious bath? I thought. The young woman inhaled the scent of strawberries with pleasure. A long time ago in another life. Just like this, in another life. And what will this life be like? Let's hope that this time I'll do well. God willing, everything will work out. The water is already cold. But Adriana didn't seem to notice. She was having such a good time. But remembering why she was here, Adriana reluctantly finished her water treatment and, putting on her robe, left the bathroom. She hesitantly stopped in the middle of the hall, not knowing where to go next to her room. But Adriana would have to meet her ward. Yes, but she needed to change her clothes. So the dress Adriana was wearing was filthy, and frankly, smelled of sweat as she stood helplessly wondering where to move. Mason's lightly steamed footsteps were heard on the stairs. He said with a smile, "Thank you," Adriana replied. "Now we will eat and get to know the ward," Mason said cheerfully and explained we will eat in her room. But let's go. Mason's mother turned out to be a thin and probably once very attractive woman. She had a kind, warm, and sincere smile. Looking at Adriana's mother, I wanted to believe that she would not be deceived in this house. What could I take from her? Adriana grinned to herself. Well, "Welcome," said the woman in an affectionate and melodious voice weakened by illness. "My name is Betty Adriana." She smiled. Mother Mason was just over 50. If it weren't for the fine lines around her eyes and the corners of her lips, she might have been 40, if not less. Her long golden blonde hair touched with gray. The woman had spent an hour pulling her hair back and putting it up high. But unlike many of Betty's peers, her hairstyle was not outdated in the slightest. "That's what Adriana," the ward said quietly. "May I call you that?" Adriana nodded. Betty said, "So Adriana, in this house, are you a guest?" "Yes, yes, and don't look at me." "So Mason told me that you were in a difficult situation, and it would be sacrilege to invite you here as a servant." Adriana looked at Mason confused, and he nodded. "Yes, yes, that's right. You'll be more of a companion to Mama than a caregiver." "Adriana, what about your sense of humor?" "Your sense of humor?" "I don't know what to say," the young woman said thoughtfully. 4 years ago, I would have said that I have a great sense of humor. I'm a psychologist by training. But now, the psychologist was a little surprised at Mason. "Yes," she sighed. "And worked in your specialty." "Worked," nodded Adriana. "In another life, you're right." Longman suddenly smiled, winked at her. It was indeed in another life. "And do you know why?" "Because there's a new life waiting for you now. And it's going to be better than the old one." "You don't believe me." And Adriana believed him for some reason. "Adriana, you know what I've been thinking?" Asked Mason at breakfast. Betty was still asleep, and they had breakfast in the kitchen. Adriana raised her head and looked at him questioningly. "You will be my mother's personal psychologist," Mason said. "Does she need a psychologist?" Adriana asked. "We all need a psychologist from time to time," Longman said thoughtfully, clearly thinking about something else. Mason was going to deliver the next batch of advertising papers and was dressed very democratically, a t-shirt and a tracksuit. Adriana remembered Longman talking about business problems, but didn't dare to ask what he was doing. Mason had been forced to sell this car because of debts and now walked to the office, thinking that the bus courier's job came in handy. In addition, the bicycle provided by the advertising agency is also not bad, and for health and fun, thought Mason. He always knew how to find a plus in everything. "Hello, Julia," greeted Mason, the employee of the advertising agency. "Are you as charming as always?" "Thank you." Mason smiled at the girl. It's nice to hear a compliment early in the morning, and even from such an interesting man. "It's not a compliment, but the truth." Longman smiled. Julia was indeed a marvel. "How good?" A petite brunette of about 23, with sly brown eyes and long lashes. "Still nice. Not without coquetry," replied the employee and proceeded to work matters. "Here are your newspapers. Have a good working day." "Thank you." Mason put a pile of advertising newspapers on the trunk and rolled towards the front of the work entrusted to him. On the way to the station, the former businessman thought about the nurse he'd brought into the house to care for his mother, more precisely, about the personal psychologist. And to be perfectly honest, Mason did not see Adriana as an employee. Adriana was undoubtedly very beautiful. Mason, of course, had no way of knowing what the young woman had looked like before she'd found herself in her predicament. But she seemed to be in Adriana's favor. She had her passport with her, and Longman knew that Lilia was 27, a year younger than himself. No, Adriana didn't look older than her age, although in her position that would make sense. It was just that those stunning green eyes seemed to belong to a woman in her 40s, if not older. The eyes of a wise and damaged woman. That was the definition that came to Mason's mind. Generally, the former owner of real estate agencies would prefer a caregiver in the age of years, so it is from 45. But in his situation, he didn't have to choose. As long as she was clean and responsible, Mason decided, and rushed to catch up with the girl. Adriana made quite a positive impression on Longman, and her psychology degree was a plus. Suddenly, Mason realized he wanted to do something nice for Adriana. Only this. As he thought about it, he almost missed the right street and mentally chuckled. Hadn't you fallen in love with Longman and remembered that airplanes came first? And the girls, then Mason went about his cursory duties. Betty, what can I make you for breakfast? Adriana asked with a smile. Don't fuss, the girl said affectionately to her mentee, and then realized, oh, it's okay that I'm on a first-name basis. It's okay. So what can I make? Coffee and a couple of cheese sandwiches would be quite enough. With a slight wave of her hand, Betty replied, and let's go to my place for a chat. Adriana replied well, and went into the kitchen. Adriana, I hope we haven't offended you in any way, the landlady asked with genuine concern. Not at all, no, Adriana exclaimed. You just saved me. You gave me a roof over my head. No work, Betty objected. Are you our guest? Why should I be? It's not like I'm related to you. No relation, the woman nodded. But sometimes relatives are worse than strangers. There was a story in our family that got Mason into business trouble. But Mason will tell you about that, if he wants to, of course. Well, Adriana, unfortunately, kinship doesn't matter. Let's not be sad. Adriana, yes, I realize, of course, that the Mason robe suits you. But maybe we can find you something from my closet. Oh, this is so uncomfortable. What else? Betty, it's much more comfortable than walking around the house in a man's robe. And the woman laughed merrily. Adriana jumped in, and within a minute they were laughing until they cried. So let's get to the makeover, Betty winked, getting out of bed. Oh, I'm getting a little dizzy. So maybe later, Adriana asked fearfully. No, it's okay, the employer's mother reassured her. I'll just sit for a few minutes and the check and everything will be fine. In the end, Adriana became the owner of a pretty soft blue polka dot dress, sewn from you goat-like cotton blouse with a floral brand in bed colors, a pair of summer skirts, and a long robe of fine silk. Well, that's quite a change, Betty said approvingly as the young woman put on the blouse and skirt. You're a fashionista, aren't you? Adriana said with a smile. Of course, Mason often spoiled me with beautiful clothes, she answered in a satisfied voice, and with a sigh, she added when he had the chance. Well, God willing, things will work out for him, Betty said the young woman. You don't think? I can do a lot of things and I'm willing to do all the cooking in the house, clean the windows, wash. Adriana jokingly wagged his finger at Betty. I said you're our guest first. We'll figure out the rest as we go along. When Mason finished delivering the ads, he went to the office, and then it hit him. Why didn't I think of that before? He chastised himself as he drove up to the store that sold clothes. Adriana had nothing to wear. He remembered, unassuming. Most likely issued in a social hotel dress, Adriana, and sighed heavily. What a pleasure it would have been for him to put her in his Peugeot right now and drive her to the boutique. But, alas, the blessed times when Mason could afford it were behind him. And this one you drop, sternly, he ordered himself. What are your years? You're not even a day old. And you'll still have that kind of decadence. In the meantime, girls, my dear, how much does a dress like this cost? Longman asked the two young saleswomen, taking off his sunglasses. No matter how much Mason convinced himself that there's no such thing as a bad job. And the most important thing is that there is. The former entrepreneur was desperately afraid someone would recognize him. No, Longman wasn't a snob. After all, he wasn't a rich hare himself. Still, his pride prevented him from showing himself to his acquaintances, especially those in the business community, as a courier and other low-level characters. However, this store was on the outskirts of town, and the risk of being there was minimal. Mason was willing to bet that it was zero. One of the girls mentioned the price of a pretty white dress, and Mason calculated whether his present earnings would be enough for a couple of such dresses, and when he realized that it would be enough, and that there would be some left over, he said cheerfully, well, fine, let's do it this way. I'll come and get the money in half an hour. In the meantime, you calm this down. And this one. Are you sure you're coming? Asked the second saleswoman. Mason smiled. Nice guy, she said. Yes, his girlfriend is lucky, replied her partner. Not rich, but he's like a stone wall behind him. You know, I think he's got all the riches ahead of him. Today our store, and there. And then, look, and to an expensive boutique is not far away. Mason was pleasantly surprised to see his mother and Adriana chatting and smiling at each other in the gazebo. For the last month, Betty had not gone outside, only stared out the window. Summer was just coming into its own, and it was still a little chilly in the morning, so her mother threw a poncho over her shoulders. Many of the women were carefully covered with light plaid. Betty's cheeks flushed. She hung back, looking better, and Mason thought of her and Adriana's meeting at the hospice. Nothing short of a gift of fate. I'm back, cheerfully, he announced. And then Longman's gaze fell on Adriana. She was wearing the skirt and blouse he had bought from his mother in Thailand. She's much prettier than I thought. Mason thought in amazement. Suddenly, he felt like a classicist giving a chocolate bar to a girl he liked for the first time. How was your day? Fun, he asked. Just great, Betty exclaimed. And we got a little dressed up. Well done, Mason nodded with a smile. Adriana thought, looking at them, that such a mother-son relationship was rare. She remembered her first husband. James had undoubtedly loved his mother, but there was still no such reverent regard for her. The mother of her second husband, Adriana, did not know. William, that is, Charles, or whoever it was, said she was dead. But was that really the case? Adriana waved her head, shaking it away from her thoughts of who was responsible for all her troubles. What's wrong? Mason asked. No, everything's fine, the young woman assured him. Adriana, and I have a small gift for you, smiled Longman, taking out of the bag. Oh, really? You shouldn't have. Adriana was embarrassed, realizing that it was probably clothes. It was very much worth it. He said firmly, You have to wear something, don't you? But I'm here to take care of your mother. Why on earth would you give me gifts? She doesn't trust men. Betty sadly realized and decided to take matters into her own hands. Adriana, I understand that you are uncomfortable accepting gifts from a man you know, she said, but you can accept these things against a future paycheck. But of course, Mason exclaimed gratefully, looking at his mother. Well, if so, nodded Adriana. That's settled, summarized Betty. Now let's go to lunch, Mason. Adriana, and I made these patties. They're delicious. She's a magician. I want some, smiled my son. Let's go. What's the point? A week passed. The atmosphere in the Mason house was improving day by day, and it couldn't be happier. This girl was a ray of light for us, Mason thought one day. And that word fit Adriana like no other. Betty was alive and seemed to be on the mend. The house was always filled with good food and exemplary cleanliness. Sometimes Mason felt like Adriana was a member of the family. He thought about her a lot in general, until he finally realized he was in love. Adriana, I think I like you, said Betty once. What makes you say that? Adriana, these things don't happen for some reason, said the mentee, who had become a real friend to Adriana over the days. I am Mason's mom, and I can feel his every mood. You can't fool a mother's heart. When you have children of your own, you'll realize that. Adriana sighed heavily at the mention of children. After all, that was essentially where it had all started. Or had it? After all, James had turned out to be a philanderer, so whether they had a child or not wouldn't change anything. Sooner or later, his nature would come out. One way or another, it happened the way it did. Adriana, and she woke up thinking, I probably shouldn't have mentioned it. Betty said thoughtfully. It's all right, isn't it? The woman asked incredulously. Adriana nodded, smiled, and squeezed Betty's hand, whispering, Really? The girl's lyrics were broken by the cheerful voice of Mason. Why don't we have a picnic, Chuck? The weather is marvelous. The soul is in need of a party. And there's an occasion. What's the occasion? Mother inquired. I got a bonus today, he boasted. So it's a good idea. Isn't that a great idea? Betty said approvingly. Adriana, what do you think? I like it too, the young woman smiled. But then I'm off to the store for wine and meat. Adriana, how do you feel about wine? They'd already switched to you, and each was pleased to note that it was more comfortable that way. Wine? I don't know, honestly. I'm not a wine drinker. But I wouldn't say no to a good glass of wine. No one offers you a bad one. Longman laughed. Mason returned half an hour later with 2 rather weighty bags of food, besides 2 bottles of red wine, and he had already bought huge pink tomatoes, cucumbers, greens, cherries, and a bunch of bananas for the marinated pork kebabs. Wow! Exclaimed Betty. Mason's having a worldwide feast. Well, the whole world can wait. But for 2 lovely ladies, I'd be delighted. While Mason grilled kebab vetua cut vegetables, and Adriana closed the table in the gazebo. The young woman suddenly had a strange feeling that they were family. What was it that made her very confused? It even seemed to Adriana that Mason and his mother might be eavesdropping on her thoughts. It would cross her mind, wouldn't it? She chided herself. Who am I to them as a servant? And just plain bad people. The shish kebab is ready, Mason reported to the ceremony, and the women sat down at the table. They ate the bottom kebab, the aroma of which spread throughout the neighborhood, drinking wine and chatting about all sorts of things, and really looked like a friendly, cheerful family. After the 3rd glass, Vetua said, I think I'll go. Wow, I'll walk you out. Adriana perked up and took the woman under her arm and led her into the house. Vetua, maybe I should stay with you, Adriana suggested. No, Adriana. I'm just tired of sitting around. I'd just like to take a nap. I'll be as good as new. You go sit with Mason and socialize. All right, the young woman replied. But if you need anything, be sure to call. Promise. I promise, Vetua smiled weakly. Go on, girl, you could use a little fun. Mason too. Adriana left the room, and Betty looked at her and smiled at her thoughts. Is everything okay? Mason asked when Adriana returned to the gazebo. Your mom says she's just a little tired, she said. Longman nodded and said field wine to himself and Adriana. Mom, how much she's been stretching for me for as long as I can remember her. All she did was fight to make sure I had everything I needed to have a normal childhood. Can you imagine? My mom worked 2 jobs, never went on vacation, took monetary compensation, and ended up compromising her health. I'm glad I had the opportunity to pamper my mom. When she turned 45, I took my mom to a restaurant. You should have seen her eyes. Mom looked at me like I had given her the whole world, and it was worth it. Adriana listened without interrupting and thought what wonderful people they were and how lucky I was to have met them. Once again, she thought. Great, she said aloud, smiling with just her eyes. Too bad. I didn't have that opportunity. My parents left so early, and while they were alive, I had problems. I'm really sorry. With sincere regret, answered Mason, and suddenly covered Adriana's hand lying on the table with her own. But you know what I think? Right now, your parents are looking down from heaven and are happy that your life is getting better. I'm sure you're going to be fine. Let's drink to that. They drank and clinked glasses on high stems. You know, I was set up by my own cousin. With sadness in his voice, Mason said, Is there such a thing? It happens, he sighed. In fact, that's why I got in trouble in business, and in a big way. But never mind. As they say, we'll live, we won't die. And the world is full of opportunities. We'll fight for our place in the sun. Adriana, why don't we take a little walk around the village? It's very beautiful here now. I don't know if that's comfortable. The young woman hesitated. What if Betty needs something? What's the phone for? Yeah, we won't go far. We'll walk around the neighborhood and back. All right. Adriana gave up. She suddenly felt like going for a walk herself. I'll just check on Betty. Okay, Mason replied with a smile, touched by such reverence for their mother. The street was beginning to blow its nose, and Adriana felt a little awkward walking under the arm of a handsome young man, as if they were a couple in love. They reached the huge oak trees. Beside the trees ran grass and bells. Adriana suddenly thought they were tinkling. When my mom and I first moved to the village, I used to love to come here and listen to the sound of those oaks, Mason said. It's really beautiful here. Adriana nodded with a smile. But your eyes are much more beautiful, he said quietly and put his arm around her waist and began to kiss her, first timidly and tenderly, then more and more insistently. Adriana, he whispered. Adriana, Adriana. The young woman, frozen stiff at first, then resolutely wrapped his arms around Mason's neck. It wasn't even a kiss, but a protest of two ravenous people against this cruel and merciless world. They penetrated each other, but it seemed to both of them that no, not close enough. I'm not letting you go anywhere. Longman whispered hotly. I really need you. Now Mason realized this was the woman he had been waiting for, and if Adriana suddenly wanted to leave, he would hold her by force. Mason knew that for sure. They should be together. Mason, don't. Adriana said quietly but firmly. It's not right. But why? I think we need to get to know each other better. And I think we already know each other enough, Longman whispered, taking her hand. There haven't been many women in my life. And do you know why? Because I've never been the type of man to go through the motions looking for the one. I only look at the ones I see as my woman. And now I know I found her. Adriana caught every word Mason said, and she wanted so badly to believe that everything he said was true. 2 failed relationships hadn't gone unrewarded. But better to do it and regret it than not to do it, and then regret it for the rest of your life. Adriana remembered the famous saying and trustingly nestled into the pocket, suddenly feeling like a kitten who found a master after a long wandering. The next day was a day off. Therefore, Mason did not need to go anywhere. At breakfast, Betty glanced furtively at her son and Adriana, and noticing the happy faces of both thought, Lord, make these two be together. Mom, I need to tell you something. Mason smiled. Adriana's eyes widened. Betty mentally thanked the Almighty. It looked like what she had dreamed of was becoming a reality. Anyway, Adriana and I love each other, Mason said. Is that true? Betty exclaimed. God, Mason. Yes, it's the most wonderful news I've heard in over a year. My children, I'm so happy for you. Adriana, what about you? Aya. The young woman couldn't say a word with excitement. Betty, it's true, Adriana replied with an embarrassed smile. I love Mason. Well, that's great. I think this case should be celebrated. Mason, Adriana, maybe we should make a celebratory dinner. Why? My son smiled. Could we? What do you think? Why not? Well, that's great, summed up the happy mother. The festive dinner was lively. Mason joked a lot, laughed a lot, and gallantly courted his girls, as he called his mother and his favorite woman. Betty couldn't remember the last time she had seen her son so happy. I wish they were doing well, the woman thought. After all, they both deserved it. 3 months passed. September was cold. But Mason and Adriana were warmed by their love and the anticipation of happiness. It couldn't be otherwise. 2 weeks ago, Mason brought a valuable package to the office of a young company, and the man sitting in the chair exclaimed in amazement, You're Mason Longman. Mason was confused. He had already forgotten about his former, but belonging to the business crowd. He was terribly embarrassed to appear before a businessman in such a disadvantageous position. But it had already happened. Yes, it's me, he admitted. You have no idea how long I've been looking for you, said the owner of the office, shaking his hand as he stood up sharply from his desk. The young man was hardly more than 25 years old, and to Mason's amazement, he looked at the courier as if he were a celestial. In short, I need a man like you, the man said more slowly and very seriously. I, Jacob, am the head of this company. We are engaged in manufacture of doors and windows. Interesting. He's still asking, thought Mason, who had given up hope of catching on to any possibility. "Well, yes, he did," Mason replied discreetly. "But doesn't it bother you that no company has wanted to do business with me in the last year?" "Oh, come on," Jacob said cheerfully. "Anyone who is aware of the situation knows where it comes from. Besides, you know, in business as in war, if you don't do it, you do it. And if someone has slipped into a puddle and can't get up, only 1 out of 10 will lend a helping hand." Mason thought with a sad chuckle. Yes, the count was in the tens. On the whole, however, he liked Jacob. He reminded Mason of himself at the beginning of his career. Longman suddenly remembered Jacob, whom he respected as a man and as a professional. So this kid is his son. Well, a worthy successor. Jacob offered Mason a cold juice, after which the men, without delay, discussed the details of cooperation. It had proved fruitful, thanks in large part to Longman. "I'm proud of you," Adriana said when she heard that her lover was back in the fold. "I always knew you would do well," Betty exclaimed, hugging her son. The lovers sat in the restaurant waiting for their order. Mason never tired of admiring Adriana. In the last 3 months, she had gotten prettier. Adriana had a striking appearance, so she hardly used makeup. A little mascara, eyeliner, lipstick, gloss, peach new color of her luxurious brown, and hair Adriana tucked into a high hairstyle and decorated with studs with rhinestones. A diamond like that needs a luxurious setting, Mason thought, looking at her with the loving eyes of a caregiver. But isn't he an idiot? Though, admittedly, she did her job as a nurse with an A+. That's right, that's right. Betty was on the mend, and there was no hint of ill health, and the offer of cooperation Mason regarded as the final chord in the series of troubles. However, that was not all. For Adriana also found a job. Now she is in office, a manager almost by specialty. After all, communicating with people implies a knowledge of psychology. The waiter brought some kind of cold dessert, on top of which an intricate composition of strawberries or mint poems was painted. "Try it," smiled Mason. "I'm not much of a dessert person, as you know. You, on the other hand, have a sweet tooth." Deliciously approved. Adriana pinch off in desserts with a spoon a piece of mass, resembling not then news, not then ice cream. "And it's beautiful to eat. It's pathetic. But you eat it." The young woman stabbed, and for dessert on a fork, a berry and whisked. Under one of the juicy berries was a wedding ring. "What do you think?" Adriana nodded, and the young woman's eyes sparkled. "Aren't you forgetting something?" asked Mason. "No, I haven't forgotten," Adriana laughed. "Mason, for God's sake. This is the 10th time you've asked me that. It's just that I'm a very much in love young man," raised a finger in the air, and grabbing the new bride in an armful, began to kiss. "Don't mess up my hair," Adriana jokingly pleaded. During their banter, Mason's purse and all its contents fell at their feet. Adriana said with a laugh, "And someone's going to ask me for my passport. Where's yours?" "My bad," said the happy groom-to-be. "Now I will correct this oversight." Mason's cell phone rang, and he answered it and whispered to Adriana, "Not as a favor, but as a friend. Please come up to my office. My passport is in the top drawer." Adriana ran up the stairs with a smile, thinking that the image of a businessman suits Mason very well. "He's cool," she thought lovingly. Adriana opened the top drawer of Mason's desk. Suddenly, her gaze fell on a document lying on the desk. Actually, not even a document, but a stamp with a picture of an apartment and the inscription Realtor Agency Maker. It seemed to the young woman that she had definitely seen this seal, and the name of the company is familiar to her painfully. And no wonder, because it was thanks to the firm that Adriana had become homeless. "Oh God," she whispered, covering her mouth with her hand. "What is this?" Further, Adriana was afraid to think. The truth was obvious. What to think now? She thought frantically. I won't be able to look him in the eye. Though who should be ashamed of him or me? When Adriana came downstairs, Mason was still on the phone. He smiled at the sight of Adriana, But when she threw at his face the passport and document found on the table, I round my eyes fearfully. "Excuse me, I'll call you back in a couple minutes," said he to the caller, and rushed off after Adriana late. When Longman ran outside, his favorite woman was already getting into a cab. At that moment, Mason berated himself for buying a house next to a parking lot. What was the use? He was more interested in another question: what fly had bitten Adriana? Apparently, it was the title deed to the apartment of one of the firm's longtime clients. She needed a certificate, and the woman's representative had gone out to Mason. Mason sank powerlessly onto the couch. He seemed to realize what the matter was. After all, Adriana had said that her parents' housing had been found to be in dispute. She probably thought the name of my agency sounded familiar. Did Michael have something to do with this? "Jacob, I have a favor to ask of you," he said as soon as he stepped into Jacob's office. Then, 2 weeks ago, Jacob asked Mason to become a partner. And the best part was that they had become friends. "What's the matter?" Jacob asked. "Mason, is something wrong? You're not wearing your face." Jacob spoke to Longman, trying to sound calm. "I was wondering if you could run me through an old deal." Details later. Mason was strangely thoughtful, looking over the report Jacob had provided. Mason had nothing to do with it at all. "Then what's the matter?" "So did you apply?" Betty asked her son, who had returned from work, and noticing the absence of her future daughter-in-law, asked, "Where is Feroshka?" Adriana interrogated the son, wishing to prolong the time. "Ah, Adriana. And she went on business." "Well, all sorts of wedding troubles. You know." "Mason, are you all right?" Betty asked cautiously. "Something must be abnormal." Mason smiled tautly. "Mason, I've known you for over a quarter of a century," said the wise and perceptive woman, "and I know your every mood. So you don't have to tell me." "Mom, she left quietly," Mason said. "That's it," said her mother. "But what happened? Just so I know." In despair, he exclaimed, feeling humiliation and terrible shame. "Maybe you hurt her in some way. You see, son, sometimes we women get offended, and you men don't understand. What's the matter?" "Mom, what are you talking about?" Mason shook his head. "But you've seen me dusting Adriana off." "True, I had one thought. But it didn't pan out." "What kind of consideration?" "I told you, it didn't work out. But you did." Meanwhile, Adriana sat on a bench at the Walk of Fame and thought, "Now I won't believe any man. They're all the same." "Adriana." She heard a sympathetic female voice. Adriana slowly looked up and saw a pretty, young, expensively dressed woman who didn't immediately recognize Kathy. Standing next to her former classmate was a stroller with a baby in it. Kathy exclaimed in surprise to Adriana, "What a meeting. I see you have a baby married." Kathy lowered her head. "No, that didn't work out. Remember Benjamin, the guy I was dating when Kathy wasn't finished?" But Adriana understood perfectly. "Yes," she nodded, "I remember." "So," sighed the classmate, "as soon as he found out I was pregnant, he immediately backed off." "Stupid, really stupid," Kathy agreed. "He didn't even realize what happiness he was giving up." "My daughter is so cute." "Yeah, well, that's his problem." "How do you look?" "Fine. By the way, I'm the one who sighed at Adriana. And I'm back on the street. I have a good job, but no roof over my head. That's the way it is." "Yeah, Lucky is drowned." "You know what? Why don't you come to my place this time? No fools. We'll grieve over a woman's unfortunate fate together." "Sounds pessimistic, but there is still no choice," Adriana sadly stated. "Churchill, I'm so embarrassed that I asked you out of the apartment guiltily," said the classmate. "Don't." Reed shook his head. "After all, it's your apartment and your personal life. You fought for your happiness as best you knew how. And whoever remembers old times must be the one who gets the eye." "You're a saint," Kathy said thoughtfully. "Not at all," said Adriana. "It's just that most often a problem makes us look at the situation from a different angle. That's the way you want to look at it. But it's not right, Kathy said thoughtfully, listening to her classmate's story. Is he really such an idiot to put a document on the table and then ask you to bring him a passport? Something doesn't add up. But Adriana shrugged. Maybe he'd forgotten the documents were on the table. Maybe so, nodded Kathy. What's the name of the real estate office? Mason wrinkled his nose. Adriana replied, I'll never forget it. Oh, really? No, that can't be right. It's Mason Longman. Player. Either you've got it wrong, or it's not that simple. Yes, Mason Longman was one of the most honest businessmen. Benjamin knew him well. There's a lot of ambiguity there. And there are rumors that his cousin set him up. Longman's innocence was proven, but the real culprit was never found. Well, I mean, he's known. But to this day, no one knows where he is. Lyra froze. She suddenly remembered how Mason had once blurted out that his cousin had set him up. But of course, that had been on the memorable night when she and Mason had first kissed. So it really wasn't Mason's fault. Adriana thought. Miller, I think you two should talk, Kathy insisted. But you're good too. You ran away without joining forces. Well, what was I supposed to do? Nail him to the wall. I could have done that. At least I'd know the truth. Oh, Kathy, I don't know what to think or believe. Adriana sighed. I don't want to believe it, but it's too simple. And being wrong twice about a man is also, you know. There was a baby crying in the next room, and Kathy went to her daughter. So Adriana said to her classmate about 20 minutes later, like I said, you can live. I got room for everyone. Plus, it's more fun with just the two of us. But personally, I think you should just explain yourself. Yeah, well, I can't advise you on that. You're on your own. A wounded bird. Not true, Adriana thought. Do you have someone to live for? It had been a month since Adriana had moved in with Kathy. The classmate was working remotely. Adriana had quit her job at Mr. Jacobs' firm to take care of the baby. The classmates supported each other as best they could and took turns taking care of the baby. How lucky is she? She thought. She stroked the pads of her fingers, pink, velvety cheeks. After all, she has a child, and I'm not lucky. Kathy had offered a classmate to be Lisa's godmother, and Adriana had been honored. I feel a little dizzy, she said as she walked out of the church and felt nauseous. Maybe it's the smell of incense, the new mom suggested. I get like that sometimes. And Kathy looked at Adriana and noticed you looked pale. Not sick. You know, Kathy, I haven't been feeling well since this morning, she remembered. That's the last time I've ever been sad. Adriana, what else? When was the last time you had one of these cases? Girls, can we get in the car already? The woman, Kathy's mother, pleaded. I'm tired. Me and Lisa squinted. Mom, wait, Kathy waved Kathy away. What do you mean, what business? I don't get it, Adriana. What do you mean, what? Did your friend pull her eyes out? Our once-a-month ladies thing. Wait, what are you saying? That's exactly what I'm saying. Kathy nodded triumphantly. No, Adriana thought for a moment. Of course, I would like it very much, but alas, we have tried for too long, but to no avail. And the doctors did not give any favorable prognosis. Well, my dear, I can name more than one couple who, having already despaired of conceiving, eventually became parents. But why guess? Go to the women's health clinic tomorrow. But let's get in the car. My mom's gonna eat us out of a birthday dinner. Congratulations, Mommy. You're 7 weeks pregnant, smiled a pretty red-headed woman about 35 years old. Are you sure? Adriana asked, confused. It's just that I haven't been able to get pregnant for years. And this? Well, my dear, I've been working for years. I know how to recognize pregnancy. The gynecologist laughed for once. So run along, make your husband a celebratory dinner and tell them the news. Yeah, I will. Oh, thank you. That's a good one. I thought Adriana's marriage wasn't working out. And then there's a relationship that didn't. And here you are. You do realize you owe me an explanation now, don't you? Kathy exclaimed. I'm not one for innuendo. Adriana realized she'd done something stupid, but it was too embarrassing to go to Mason with her tail up and say, "Oh God," and that would make her think I was trying to tie the baby down. Adriana thought with horror. Lyric, you've got it written all over your face, laughed Kathy. I bet. Right now you're thinking about the fact that it's not proper for a decent woman to tie a man to a child. Adriana only grinned. A shrewd friend, she thought. Adriana, answer me one question, yes or no. Do you want to be with Mason? But no, well, yes or no, Kathy reminded her. Yes, Adriana answered and lowered her eyes. That's what you should dance from. And dance how? I mean, what to do. The answer is obvious. Come and repent Mason on. Or rather, find out what's what. Well, if he's guilty, does the fact that he got off somehow mean nothing? Then Mason had money, connections. Red. Honestly, I want to believe in Mason's innocence, but I'm afraid of being fooled again. I don't understand your position, for the life of me. Kathy shook her hands. But even if you suspected him, you could have told him openly. What's the point of leaving in English? I don't even understand it anymore. While I was telling Adriana and Kathy, there's something else. Something else. Yeah, you're a real piece of work. But what have you got? Nothing criminal, I hope. No, I shook my head. Not on my part anyway. Anyway, I hid from Mason that I'd been victimized by a con man. After James, I remarried, and my hubby Igor got me an apartment. He turned out to be a marriage and apartment scammer. Now that's interesting. Something tells me, well, it's worth looking into. I've got an idea. What is it? Adriana's interested. Adriana's later. Kathy was not a woman who was lucky in her personal life. Though which way to look at it? She was flamboyant, spectacular. On her account was a lot of Masonove, including with a rather enviable fiancé, but with a serious relationship as it did not add up. But what cannot be taken away is a crowd of admirers. So why not take advantage of the connections? So where is it so beautiful, if not a secret? Adriana inquired. When Kathy undressed in an exquisite outfit, the color of ripe cherries with an asymmetrical muzzle hem, and one sleeve, concentrated on doing a luxurious makeup. The secret was gone. Kathy, and clutching the scrap, expired sale, hurried to the exit, where a cab was waiting for her. Kevin seduce. Kathy smiled at her beau, who was MIA. I'd like to bring up one not-so-old story. Remember the real estate agency scandal? Kevin and Kathy were sitting in a small, cozy restaurant styled after a hunting lodge. For Kevin, it was a date he'd spend a third of his paycheck on. For Kathy, it was a business meeting. Although how do you look at it? Well, hummed Kevin, who had been long ago and hopelessly in love with Kathy. A very ambiguous case. Yes, and the culprit turned out to be multifarious. This is it, she thought excitedly. I think I'm on the right track. You mean in an innocent voice? Kathy asked. That's what I mean. The suitor smirked, looking at her with loving eyes. Mason Longman was framed by one Michael Macadam, his cousin. But that's not even the point. This same Macadam goes by several first and last names. Bingo. Kevin, I love you. Merlot echoed Kathy and sat up to her admirer and kissed him on the cheek. Kevin bloomed. The next day, Adriana sat in the restaurant waiting for her friend. Kathy was indecently late, and she had already pulled out her phone to call her friend. Hi. She heard an unfamiliar baritone and nodded in surprise. Hi. Complaint about Adriana. And not being able to think of anything better to do, she added. I was expecting Kathy. Kathy will be Kathy, nodded Longman. In the meantime, Mason took out his smartphone and entered the gallery. Adriana, do you know this man? He asked, opening the photo in front of him. I do, stunned. Adriana said, This is William, my second husband. I'm sorry. I didn't tell you that he's the reason I ended up on the street. Why didn't you tell me about him? I was ashamed, she admitted. Ashamed, Mason repeated. In the meantime, if you had told me about it right away, but ideally, you would have mentioned the name of my firm. There wouldn't have been the misunderstanding that happened between us. Yeah, well, whatever. It's just a pigeon. This guy's real name is William Michael Macadam, and he's my cousin, or was he? I have no idea what's happened to him now, or if he's even alive. I wouldn't be surprised if he isn't. With his penchant for adventure and card games, when I reported him to the police, they instantly told me he was also known as Charles Dolgov. Adriana whispered, maybe, smoked, and threw Adriana's cell phone. Notify the owner of the message on Messenger. The young woman smiled. It was a message from Kathy. Don't forget to tell him the important thing. A friend had written. Easy for her to say, Adriana thought. She had to do it anyway, though. Mason. Yes, love my charming, smiled Longman Rim Things, taking Adriana's hand. There's something I need to tell you. I'm listening to you carefully. I must. Oh my God. I've been looking forward to this. And now this. What's the matter? Mason laughed. You think you were hiding some terrible secret from me. In a way I am. Adriana nodded, and then she blurted out, I'm pregnant. Is it true? Longman exclaimed happily. No, I was joking. The young woman pretended to buy us. Ask me if I'm sure it's your baby. No. Mason laughed. I'm certainly not gonna ask that. I'm as sure of you as I am of myself. Kevin and Kathy approached them. They're in cahoots. Adriana gasped. That's exactly what Trinity laughed back. Don't forget Lenka. You have to catch the bouquet. It's probably the 10th time, Kathy reminded me. Still, if it wasn't for me, there wouldn't be a wedding. You're my Cupid. Adriana smiled, hugging her friend. I remember everything, but to tell you the truth, I don't see the point of it. Kevin has enough on his plate as it is. He's going to propose to you not today, but tomorrow. I don't know, serenely, smiled her friend and part-time witness. But I want everything to be according to tradition. Adriana, I love you. They heard Mason's voice and looked out the window in friendship. Adriana sent an air kiss to her spouse and Mason waved. You know, Kathy said seriously to the happy bride. Mason once told me that from now on, a happy new life awaits me. And he's right. Cheerfully, Kathy continued and winked. But what's forward to the new life? Yes, replied Adriana with a smile. At that moment, the young woman was more confident than ever that all the hard trials were behind her and her life was finally on a white streak. After all, this time, she had the most wonderful man in the world by her side. Subscribe and click the bell.
The sun was slowly but surely moving toward zenith. Evelyn felt the hot rays of the sun burning her lower back through the thin cotton fabric of her t-shirt, the skin on her arms and ankles turning crimson. The woman paused for a moment to assess the extent of her defeat. What she saw shocked the woman, and she didn't hold back from commenting. By evening there will be bubbles, and then the skin will go stocking slip. I just went out, and I'm already burned. Like most blondes, Evelyn was afraid of sunbathing. Miracle creams never helped her, so she tried to stay out of the sun on particularly hot days. But to pull out today under the heat, she was forced by her neighbor. To be exact, not Nancy herself, but unwillingness to face her on the plot. She was an elderly woman in the village, disliked by many for her quarrelsome nature. Evelyn also had a bitter experience with her, and now always carefully avoided the neighbor's house. Even to the store for groceries, the young woman took a circuitous route, so as not to inadvertently stumble upon an unpleasant grandmother. For the same reason had to work in the vegetable garden in haste, and the most inopportune time. The nasty neighbor would go out to work on the beds when it was cold, and when the sun began to blaze, she would run away to her ramshackle house. There were different rumors about Nancy's building in the village, sometimes even the most ridiculous, but the landlady always called her dwelling a homestead, which pleased the local jokers. Village humorists amused the people with various pearls, the heroine of which was Nancy. The old woman in her own way perceived not humane attitude of her fellow villagers to her person. Despite her advanced years, the grandmother with youthful enthusiasm took revenge on offenders. In her arsenal were different ways, but most of all the grandmother liked to write complaints with invented facts. Nancy would file a denunciation with a policeman. Do you think Ethan had it all worked out? Ethan who? Well, I mean Tesla. My name may not be known yet, but who knows what will happen in 5 or 10 years? Trying to be calm, Evelyn interrupted the sweet dreams of her loser husband. John, you're as far away from Tesla as you are from the moon. You're a loser or a modern-day loser. Therefore, I'm going to stop subsidizing your ideas completely. And in simple terms, I'm not giving you another dime. So instead of doing this nonsense, you'd better think about your job. I can't keep you on my back forever. This reproach cut painfully on the male ego, and John's polished face immediately distorted with a grimace of hatred. You've decided to kick me around with reproaches. Have you forgotten the shit I pulled you out of? If I hadn't married you 8 years ago, you'd still be in the pigsty. I saved you from slave labor and poverty. Evelyn knew that John was about to blame her for all his failures, so to avoid making matters worse, she went out onto the porch in silence, but her raging husband couldn't stop. You shouldn't do that, Evelyn. You'll regret humiliating me, and you'll regret it more than once when I'm rich. It'll happen, and I'll pass you by. You'll beg me to forgive your callousness, but I won't even look in your direction. So that his expressive monologue would not be drowned in the void, the man also left the house after his wife. Evelyn, you're lost without me. Come to your senses, you wretch. Otherwise, you'll end up in a garbage dump. Noticing that his only listener was getting farther away from the house, John ran after her, but immediately fell into the trench he had dug more than a month ago. Evelyn laughed heartily. You see, John, this is a sign from above. I remember you promised to bring water into the house, then you promised to steward the house, and all your promises are in this hole. You just dug yourself. Evelyn could hear her husband swearing as he climbed out of the grassy trench. She had long since gotten used to his flamboyant performances. Several times she had tried to get away from the scandalized man, but always something stopped her. And in the whole world, she had no one more dear to her than John. Despite his quarrelsome character, her husband never raised a hand on her, and he was not far. In the dense raspberries behind the neighboring fence, a quiet rustling was heard, and after a while Nancy herself appeared. Good day to you, Evelyn, and good day to you, Nancy. Evelyn regretted that she had not noticed her neighbor in time. Now she would have to listen to the old woman's ramblings for the sake of propriety, but it didn't bother Nancy much that her appearance was not greeted with joy. She shook off from her warm vest, plant debris, bloody raspberries, all chipped away, and no one cares, all abandoned. Evelyn was surprised not only by the old woman's inappropriate attire, but also by the eagerness with which she waded through the thorny shrubbery. The woman would hardly have made such a sacrifice for the sake of mere curiosity. Her hunch was at once confirmed. Nancy fixed her handkerchief on her small head, which resembled an unripe pumpkin. Evelyn, how good it is to see you. There's a matter at hand, and I can't do without you. I'm listening to you very carefully, Nancy. The thin lips of the old woman smiled, and her voice had an ingratiating tone. Evelyn knew she was about to ask for something. In the 8 years she'd lived with John, she'd learned to be calm about the most unusual requests, but she could tell from the way her neighbor was taking a long time to gather her thoughts that her grandmother was going to make some special demands. Nancy coughed for reassurance. "I'll tell you what, dear neighbor, my grandson, and he's a well-known man in town and almost an oligarch, has decided to revitalize our village." Although Evelyn didn't understand what her grandmother was getting at yet, she supported this initiative in absentia. It was high time to change something in our village. Grandmother was glad to have the support, and my Benjamin, too, thinks it's the right time to renew the village. He wants to build a bunch of stores and a factory to make juice. But first his grandson plans to build himself a 2-story house with an underground garage and parking lot. He told me a lot of things, but I didn't get all the details over the phone. And I'm very happy for you and your grandson. But what do I have to do with his plans? Now, honey, I'll explain everything. Benjamin likes it very much, this very spot where my manor house stands. It's close to the river and a short walk to the store. Well, but what's it got to do with me? Nancy could not bear it, and her peaceful tone changed to an angry one. What's not to understand? Our lots are right next to each other. Benjamin's house is to be built on the site of my estate. I've described everything to him in my will anyway. But my grandson wants to make a small park with a summer tent and fountains. He has 3 kids, and they need a separate place to play and have fun. Benjamin's other plans include Evelyn interrupting a pushy neighbor. "Thank you for sharing your favorite grandson's plans with me, but they don't interest me much. What do you want from me, Nancy?" The neighbor rolled her eyes in surprise. "Why do you pretend to be a silly fish, Evelyn? My grandson's got his sights set on your lot. What's not to understand? The house is registered to you, as far as I know. When Molly died, her mansion and the land passed into your hands? Am I wrong? What of it?" The old woman swung her hand like she was holding a saber. "All right, I can see it's no use talking to you. Benjamin will be here soon, but he'll talk differently. Don't threaten me with Nancy, and tell your Benjamin I'm not going to sell the house. Let him count on your inheritance." The old woman shook her dry fists even harder. "For your malicious character, Evelyn, God will not give you children." The old woman knew how to hurt her uncooperative neighbor. She had hit the sorest spot. Evelyn grabbed a dry twig lying on the floor and threw it at Nancy. "You old hag, go away." The log came down with a whistle somewhere in the bushes, but the young woman realized that she had hit exactly the target. Nancy from afar began to send threats. "I'll file a police report on you. You'll get jail time for self-harm." Evelyn no longer paid attention to the shouts of the old woman. She walked slowly towards the house, trying to answer the main question. "But why is all the misfortune dumped on my head?" At her appearance, John perked up. "Oh, is Evelyn mine? Tired? Do you want me to heat up dinner?" My husband acted as if there'd never been a quarrel this morning. He fussed in the kitchen, reporting on the work done. At first, I wanted to work in the garage, but then I thought I'd clean up the stain on the ceiling. Evelyn looked up. The problem spot was covered by a slanted piece of wallpaper of a completely different shade, but the husband was very pleased with his work. Wasn't that better? The woman was so tired from the noisy morning that she twisted her heart. "Yes, darling," almost imperceptible. The praise emboldened the man, and in his mind immediately activated a fantasy track. "Tomorrow I'll dig a trench, or I'll break my legs. It's unlikely we'll be able to bring water into the house this summer anyway. It's gonna take a lot of money. I will complete my project. I got a patent, and then you and I will live. We will go to the south." Jean noticed that his wife did not share his joy. "Evelyn, what's wrong? Is your back hurting again?" The woman often complained of lower back pain. Often she couldn't get out of bed for days. Then John treated her with ointments and even gave her injections himself. But now it was obvious that his wife was in a bad mood, not because of her back. Just now, John, I had a fight with Nancy. The old witch has been ambushing me in her vegetable garden. What does she want? Not her John, but her grandson. Briefly and in general terms, they want our lot in the house. John whistled in surprise, to which Evelyn immediately reacted sharply. How many times have I told you not to whistle in the house? That's why we're always tight on money. Oh, come on, all this superstition. Personally, I do not believe in any omens. You better tell me how much they're offering for our house. John looked at his wife with the look of a 5-year-old child who came to the toy store to choose something he liked. By the way, I shared a desk with Benjamin for 3 years in junior high school. Then his parents moved to the capital. Our locals said that his dad had made it big, and that's the kind of guy who makes money. So it might be something to consider. Evelyn lowered herself gingerly into a chair. John, are you serious? Or are you joking again? What jokes, Evelyn? We're being offered money, and that doesn't happen every day. Think of the prospects. I can finish my project, which in turn will get me a lucrative contract, and then, John, why are you always talking about yourself and your plans? This is my home, by the way, and maybe you should ask my opinion about it. And then have you thought about where we're gonna live if we sell the house? The man looked at his wife with the same childish look. I'm sorry, I didn't think about it, but we can rent an apartment or part of the house for a while. All right, John, enough of this nonsense. I'm not selling the house to Benjamin or anyone else. You and your ideas are really going to make me homeless. John remained standing at a loss in the kitchen with a ladle in one hand. The man was trying to understand how he could refuse to accept money that was coming his way. Not a week after the unpleasant conversation with Nancy, the village was blessed with the arrival of Benjamin himself. The entire small population of the village poured out into the street to pay their respects to the iconic personage. Surprisingly, the scene resembled the arrival of royalty in Murom, depicted by the hand of a famous artist, only the place of the Russian empress was occupied by a successful businessman. Benjamin instantly caught the mood of the crowd. He smiled and bowed to the sides. There were, of course, those who looked at it with laughter, but most of them literally devoured their hope with their eyes. I am glad to see you all, my fellow countrymen. I promise to do everything for the revival of our small homeland. For completeness of the picture, there was not enough candy or money, which by duty could scatter bodyguards. But for gifts, the local oligarch was apparently stingy. However, even without material support, the PR campaign was at a high level. Now everyone in the village was talking about Benjamin's arrival, and Nancy couldn't feel the ground beneath her feet with pride. John decided that he should take the opportunity too, and at dinner he said to his wife, as if by the way, I think I'd ought to drop in on Benjamin. Maybe he'll remember a schoolmate. Evelyn suddenly supported her husband. Come in. Maybe he'll at least offer you a job. If a man is planning to build, he'll need specialists. At least you'll be useful. Of course, Evelyn, I appreciate your opinion, but I'm not a builder. I have a completely different specialty. The man spoke with an obvious challenge, alluding to his engineering degree. But his moment of glory didn't last long, because his wife mercilessly killed the untimely flight of fancy. Your specialty, John, is sitting on my neck, and I'm tired of it. And you must realize I'm not giving you any more money. You have to start earning your own bread sometime. Another scandal was coming. John had already taken in more air in his lungs to respond with dignity to his wife's perfidy. But at that moment, there was a sudden knock at the door. The couple were very surprised to see that Mr. Benjamin himself came to visit them. The owner of the house began to make a fuss about the guest. "Welcome to our hearth. I didn't expect you to think of me, Benjamin, but it's a pleasure." The guest only nodded at the welcoming ritual, but paused. He sat down at the table, which Evelyn was promptly setting, and even drank the cup offered by his host, but that Benjamin traditionally made the first toast to the meeting. The men drank and reached for the pickles, which the hostess put on the table. "Help yourself, dear guest, my mistress makes great pickles." The businessman took another drink. "That's right, John. Only in our village women know how to pickle cucumbers." "Then let's have a drink, because it's uncomfortable to stand on one leg." "Don't think I'm not into this business, but I believe that ancestral traditions should be honored." "I'd agree, but don't pour me any more." "Hypertension. I don't want to die before my time. I've got a lot of work to do." Benjamin was an excellent speaker. He knew where to pause and where to raise the tone a little. Evelyn had briefly attended an art reading club at school, where they were taught how to speak properly. Now she watched the guest with undisguised interest, realizing that he did not appear to them for the sake of an old friendship with John. But the guest began from afar. "John, how many years has it been since you and I used to go trick-or-treating together at recess?" The landlord began to calculate in his mind. "Nearly 30. You left us right after 3rd grade." Benjamin sighed. "Yes, unfortunately, we can't know where life will take its next turn. I didn't think I would return to my home village one day either. But what amazes me the most is how small the world is. Why am I saying this? You're about to find out. Imagine when I shared my plan with my colleagues, there was a person in my team who also came from these places." The guest glared at Evelyn, but she calmly waited for the rest of the story. John was clearly puzzled by this turn of events. "Benjamin, why are you pulling the cat out of the bag? Just tell it like it is." "I didn't mean to offend you." "We're not offended, but let's get to the point, Benjamin. Who's that goose in your office who can't live without our village?" "I think we know who he is. It's Ethan." The plate slipped out of the hands of the surprised hostess. "Uncle Ethan, does he work for you?" I tell you, it's a small world. After all, the guest had achieved the desired effect and was now enjoying the result. "You see, dear Evelyn, I had a frank conversation with your uncle, during which it became clear that Ethan is very dissatisfied with his grandmother's death warrant. Not only that, but he considers the document invalid and even intends to contest it." Sensing an impending cloud, John intervened in the conversation. "But it's impossible." "You're wrong, friend. It is possible. After all, it hasn't even been a year since your grandmother died, has it? Or am I wrong, Evelyn?" Evelyn felt her mouth go dry. "What are you trying to say?" "My grandmother had her will drawn up and notarized while she was still alive." "That's understandable, but you're not a direct heir." "But Uncle Ethan refused, and now he's changed his mind. I suggest you reconsider. And remember, I only make a very good offer once and then. Oh, by the way, John, I'm planning to start construction before the fall, so I need reliable people. Can I offer you a job as an old friend? But I'm not a builder. I'm more of an iron worker." "That's fine. Will you be foreman or forewoman?" "Agreed." John stretched out. "Well, I'm always ready. Then come over tomorrow. I'm staying at my grandmother's, but it's only temporary. As soon as I get things settled, I'll be back in town. What about construction?" "That's why I'm looking for reliable people. People who can be trusted with serious business and money." As soon as the door closed behind the guest, John cursed. "What a creep, that Uncle Ethan of yours." Evelyn said quietly, I didn't expect him to be so mean either. How much misery has he caused, Mom? He's taking it out on me, too. Evelyn's mother and grandmother had carefully avoided talking about her father when she was very young, and she hadn't been much interested in the matter either. But later she tried several times to find out where her father was and why he lived in another country. Uncle Ethan decided to enlighten her niece, Mother's own brother. One day at a family dinner he said, "I think, Camille, it's time to tell the girl." Evelyn remembers well the mother's belittling look at her brother. "Ethan, please don't. You know perfectly well that William is not to blame." "Then who is?" "No, sweet sister. He left you with a 1-year-old child to go to your uncle's. He traded you and your daughter for money." Suddenly, the grandmother supported her son. "Yes, that's exactly what happened. It's you, Camille, because of your blind love, did not finish the institute and could have made it in the people, if not for the early marriage." A 15-year-old girl was uncomfortable listening to her grandmother and uncle reproach her mom for loving her father so much. Evelyn decided to stand up for her mother. "Is love a crime?" The grandmother looked at her granddaughter. "You're too young to reason. When you have children yourself, you'll know what it's like to raise them. I raised 2 of them on my own, worked 2 jobs, and kept piglets, and all for the sake of educating my children. Thank you that at least Ethan became a man, but Camille didn't appreciate my efforts. She fell in love. She got married in her 3rd year, and soon you were born." Grandma was ready to continue the story, but Mom shouted at her, "Please do not fool the child's head. It was your efforts that made me a single mother. It was you, Mom, who then played a comedy with your illness when William came to fetch us. It was you who separated daughter and father." After this, the relatives began to shower at each other with reproaches. Evelyn was disgusted with them and ran away to a friend's house. And soon there was a misfortune with my mother. When she was feeding the pigs, and my grandmother had 8 of them, she was attacked by a wild boar. The woman screamed for a long time, but no one heard her. Only late in the evening, Grandma suddenly realized, "Evelyn, where's Camille?" "I saw her come home from work, and then she disappeared." The girl found her mother unconscious. When the hospital x-rayed her, the doctors were shocked. Poor thing. She had multiple fractures, damaged internal organs. Mom was in the hospital for months. She had one operation after another, but she got weaker and weaker every day. Evelyn ran straight to the hospital after school and sat by her sick mother's bedside for hours. Lessons had to be done late at night. Grandmother visited her daughter only 3 times. "I have no time to go to hospitals. If I don't feed them in time, they'll go to waste. And Evelyn, you'd be less likely to go there, just for 5 minutes, and that's enough. I can't do without a helper." One day, Evelyn couldn't stand the injustice. "Grandma, aren't you ashamed? Mom is your own daughter, and you treat her as if she were your stepdaughter. But everything is for Uncle Ethan, and those pigs, and the damn boar that trampled on Mama. Everything is for him, too." The shocked Molly could not utter a word, and Evelyn cried and screamed with resentment. "I heartily wish that boar would die." The old woman immediately came to her senses and slapped her granddaughter. "I wish your tongue was dead. The boar weighs over 10 pounds. That evening Evelyn did not come home to spend the night. She spent the night sitting next to her mother, whose condition had deteriorated sharply. The woman was falling into a restless sleep, then calling her. In the morning she asked, "Daughter, at home, in my album there are pictures where we are all together, you and me, and your dad. Don't believe it. He's a very good man. It's just that everything's worked out against us. If I get better, you and I will go to my dad, There's his address right to him." 2 days later, Mom died. Evelyn looked for the picture the dying woman had mentioned in the papers, but she couldn't find it. And then she forgot about that picture, because a completely different life began for her. Now all household chores fell on the fragile shoulders of a 16-year-old girl. After school, she would run home to feed the pigs and chickens. Then she had to weed the beds that stretched as far as the horizon. During summer vacations, when school friends and girlfriends went to the sea with their parents or vacationed in health camps, Evelyn did not unbend her back from morning till late in the evening. The list of her duties was enormous, and her grandmother made sure that every item was completed. Twice a year, Uncle Ethan came in from out of town. He would fill the car to the brim with groceries, and without hiding his pleasure, drive back. The hard labor took its toll on the girl's health. She was found to have a herniated spine, and later doctors discovered a problem in the female side. So John was right about one thing: he did spare her from slave labor when he proposed to become his wife. Molly took the news of her granddaughter's marriage in stride. She threw a tantrum. I'm everything to her, and she decided to throw me away. Ungrateful. The future son-in-law listened to these unfair claims and advised Molly to attract his son to hard labor. To the grandmother, this suggestion amounted to an insult, and she shoved John out the door. It was then that Evelyn first disobeyed her old grandmother and left home with her fiancé. At one time, they were staying with her husband's parents, where John's brother John and his family lived. About a year passed, and Molly showed up for a visit. The woman cried for a long time, complained about her fate, and then fell on her knees in front of her granddaughter and began to ask for her forgiveness. "Forgive me, Evelyn. Forgive me for everything. Since you left me, I can't find a place for myself. Please come back. Live with me at my place. I've used up all the livestock. No, I don't have the health to take care of animals." It was unbearable to watch the humiliation of a native person, and the young people returned to Molly's house. Grandmother behaved quietly, tried not to interfere in the family affairs of her granddaughter. She was often ill, and Evelyn did not leave her bedside for 24 hours, just like when her mother was dying. Molly was very homesick, and she was even more worried about Uncle Ethan. "Evelyn, you should call him." "What's wrong? Why isn't he coming? He forgot his mother." The girl dialed her uncle's number many times, but he immediately referred to the lack of time. John sincerely felt sorry for the old woman. He heard these requests, but only Evelyn once in the heart said everything he thought about her uncle. "That's your Uncle Ethan, you bastard. When the old woman was dying, tending the cattle so that he and his children could eat, then he'd show up. And the helpless mother, he has no time to visit her. For 6 years, the son only once visited his mother, but stayed only an hour. Shortly after this visit, Molly and decided to redo the will in favor of her granddaughter. Shortly before her death, she gave her a photograph of her happy parents holding her in their arms. On the back of the photo was an address in English. "It's all my fault, Evelyn. I didn't want Camille to go abroad, and I separated her from William. He was a positive guy, he was already a candidate, and he was invited to work there. And then we came to get you, and I wouldn't let Camille go. But the worst part was that when he called once, I lied and said that Camille had married a good man." Evelyn listened to her grandmother's confession, but her anger was gone. She realized that nothing could be changed and forgave her grandmother. After her death, there was only one close person left in the whole world. Evelyn was afraid that one day he would betray her, but there is a belief that what one fears will happen one day. Just as Benjamin had promised, in August a big construction project was underway in the village. John enthusiastically took up the task assigned to him. From early in the morning until late at night, he was at the site he was entrusted with. With his wife, he rarely shared his work, answering her questions unambiguously. Everything is normal. The work is going on. The salary drops into the account. But a month passed, then the second, but the promised salary was not brought to the house. He completely forgot about his super project and rarely visited the garage. As it turned out later, Evelyn had no idea what her husband had done with other people's money. It all came out of the blue. One day John came home earlier than usual, his face pale as chalk and his hands shaking. "Evelyn, I need money right away. Lots of money." The woman's heart sank in a premonition of bad things to come. "What's wrong?" That simple question sent her husband into a rage. For the first time in his life, he took a swing at her. "Why do you feign saintly naivete? I thought I told you in plain language that I need money, and it's urgent. Are you my wife or not?" Evelyn was silent. She was shivering, and her hands and feet were ice cold. At last she got over her excitement. "I too, John, asked you in plain language. What's wrong? I have a right to know. You're singing about your rights again. This is all your fault, sending me to work for that ashhole. You don't have enough money. I think you're the one who's been stealing it from me. What should I do this time? Help me. For the last time, let's sell the Dan house while that bastard's offer still stands. Can you explain to me properly why this is so urgent? All right, look. I just got screwed again, and I've decided to temporarily divert some of the money Benjamin gave me for materials to another project. What was it? There was a lucrative venture, and I thought I'd invest in it for a nice dividend. But it didn't work out. I ran into some crooks, and today, as luck would have it, Benjamin demanded all the invoices. That's the story. Evelyn didn't want to hear from the man anymore. She didn't care anymore. All right, if we sell this house, or if Uncle Ethan sues us for it anyway, where do you think you're going to live? That was a question John couldn't answer. Uncle Ethan showed up in the morning. Well, weren't you expecting young people? I see that I've been on your heads like a snowball. But it's a good thing, because you can put all the dots on the inheritance question. Well, I filed a lawsuit to review this case, of course. I hired a good lawyer, so not to spoil the nerves of neither you nor myself, I suggest you move out of your parents' house. After all, anyway, then the bailiffs will put you out, and that the judges will decide the case in my favor, I do not doubt at all. I'm the son and Evelyn is the granddaughter. The law is on my side, and the fact that my mother made a will before she died, she wasn't in her right mind. I've got the certificate. In short, I'll give you 24 hours. Uncle Ethan left. Evelyn began to pack her things. John asked in surprise, "Where are you going?" "Wherever I want to go." "What about me? Don't you realize that Benjamin will roll me for money?" At that moment, the door opened wide, and the autumn wind blew in. John looked at Benjamin with horror. "Wow! And we were just thinking about you and your wife, just like the proverb says. Think of something and it will appear." The joke turned out to be a bad one, and the next moment, John's body slammed into the opposite wall. "Why, Benjamin?" "You know why." Ignoring Evelyn and John, who was in pain, the guest defiantly set the table in the center of the living room. "Well, are we going to joke again, or are we going to talk seriously?" "I'm talking to both of you. And to you, Evelyn, that goes for you too." "What's it got to do with me? He wasted your money, deal with him." "No, that wasn't the deal." "John, your husband? What's that supposed to mean?" "Because my guys are gonna cut him to ribbons. He's a big hit, but this time he won't make it between construction sites." "I need the money." John made it out of the corner. Benjamin, honestly, I'll make it up to you. I'll work on your construction site for free for a year. That's a good point, but it's not you, Ashole, it's your wife. And for you as a punishment, I have picked up another mission, and I don't think you will like it. But there are no other options if you want to live. John began to crawl on his knees in front of Benjamin. It was disgusting to watch this picture of humiliation. And Evelyn grabbed her suitcase, but the guest squeezed her hand, but the woman tried to break free. Let go, you're hurting me. But Benjamin squeezed the vise even harder. Evelyn screamed, Madam, it will hurt you even more if I entrust you to my boys. They like to work on women, so you'd better keep your head down. Well, you're loaning your woman out. I am, Benjamin. You can have her forever. Evelyn watched her husband tearfully crawl at the feet of his former classmate. She felt no pity for him, only contempt and disdain. Benjamin read all of this in the betrayed woman's gaze. He took her suitcase with one hand and led her to the exit. At the door, Evelyn turned around as if she were saying goodbye to her past life forever. Come on, you don't want to disturb yourself with such an unpleasant sight. Benjamin pushed the woman lightly toward the exit. The door slammed shut, but outside they could hear John wailing at the top of his voice. Evelyn, stay. I shall perish without you. The businessman spat contemptuously. You wretch, it's you who will be doomed if you stay with this man. Forgive me for some inflection, but I'm really ready to tear John apart. He's been such a jerk to me. I don't know how to untie myself now. Benjamin's words sounded quite human, and Evelyn looked at him in surprise. I don't understand. Do you really want me to be your slave? Yes and no. Come, let's talk. I have a proposition for you. You can refuse, of course, but then I'll ask you to return all the money your husband has squandered. Anyway, he's still your husband, but you'll still take the house, won't you? Benjamin nodded. I will, and no one can stop me, as you have already realized. But the only problem is that the money the house is worth won't be enough to pay off the debt. Do you have any idea how much he cut me off? You see, on the one hand, I don't care about anyone who lives here. You're a smart woman, I think you know that, and I don't care about your idiot husband. The fact that I'll give him a chance is a big deal for you. Benjamin stopped in front of his car, opened the door for Evelyn. You all believe in miracles here in the village. Miracles don't happen. In the city, they would have killed the whole family for that amount of money, and I'm talking to you. He put Evelyn in the car. They drove off. Evelyn felt her heart pounding. I want to tell you right away, Evelyn, if you think about running away, your John will be totally screwed. So a man's life depends on you. Evelyn understood now. So sorry. And what should I do? Most importantly, for how long? How long, I haven't counted it yet. It all depends on your work. But what to do now you'll see. They drove to the edge of the village. There was no way to see it from the village, and now Evelyn was numb. It had changed completely in a matter of months. Huge greenhouses stood in rows, apples and pears were planted, and some other trees that were unfamiliar to Evelyn. A large wooden building stood a little to the side. Here, someone should be in charge of all this, not only to work, but also to make others work and to be responsible. Do you understand, Evelyn? Not really. But look, you'll do a good job, and everyone should do a good job, and I'll be there to watch. And if you don't do a good job, the debt won't go down. And if the debt doesn't go down, you'll have to work here for a long time. Only now Evelyn realized what a trap she'd fallen into. And John will work off the debt too, won't he? Benjamin laughed. No, Evelyn. Your husband's as useless as a goat's milk. Not only is he an idler, but he's also a thief. So you, and only you, will repay the debt. But that's not fair. Evelyn almost cried. Where have you seen justice in our world, Evelyn? Besides, you heard yourself that your husband gave you to me for debts. I'm going to the police. The woman grasped the doorknob with determination. Of course you will. I've got plenty of testimony about how you and your husband cleaned me out together. Believe me, for that amount of money, you two will go to jail for a long time. You're such scum. Benjamin laughed again. I have to agree with you there. If I wasn't trash, I'd be living, like you and John, in utter poverty and dung. Shall we go? I'll help you carry the suitcase. They came to a wooden building. There was no other word for it, as Evelyn realized she wasn't the first one here. A woman came out to them, looking more like a man. Well, what else did they bring? Is it any good, or is it just as inept as the others? Well, Wendy, that's what you're here for, to keep everyone working like a bee. Wendy laughed. You know I have a fly to collect honey. Benjamin turned around and walked to the car without saying goodbye. Evelyn caught up with him. Don't forget to count the debt, so I know how long I have to work here. I'll do that when I have time. Don't worry, you'll be working here for a long time. Still, I might want to pay you back in money. Benjamin looked at her like she was crazy and went on his way. As it turned out, there were already several unfortunates like Evelyn here. One was working off her husband's debt, who had recklessly wrecked Benjamin's car, and her husband was at home babysitting. They had 2 children. The second had racked up credit, and Benjamin had saved her. She thought he was a kind man and ended up here. In fact, they were all here voluntarily, well, or almost voluntarily, because if any of them left, quit their jobs, the problems would pour in like a cornucopia. Benjamin didn't keep anyone by force. You could go home, you could go home. True, Evelyn didn't have a home. She got out a week later, wanted to show John what her hands had become and spit in his face. But she came out and the house was gone. In place of the house, where her favorite roses had grown, construction was in full swing. Evelyn cried and turned back. Evelyn? She turned around. Standing next to her was Grandma Clara. She used to come to them often when her grandmother was alive. She used to swear at her grandmother, but she didn't take offense. They had been friends for a long time. Hello, Baba Clara. Evelyn sighed. I don't understand something. The house has been sold. There's no one here. I saw John leaving with his suitcases. Why aren't you with him? I'm not with him. I'm working. For Benjamin? They say he doesn't pay at all. He's trying to cheat, or are people lying? She waved her hand and cried, What are you, a girl? Tell me, what happened to you? I haven't seen you in 6 months, and already you've changed so much. Evelyn and Grandma Clara sat down on the grass and Evelyn told her everything. She knew she couldn't help her, but she felt a little better. The old woman shook her head. I don't know who's the bigger bitch in this situation. You're John or Benjamin? But Benjamin is understandable. He grew up to be a bastard from a young age. But John, I'd kill him. It's all your fault, Evelyn. You should have sent him to work, not let him eat. Where have you seen that? A big forehead sitting on his grandmother's neck. Baba Clara spat and sat and thought, That's it, Evelyn. You should look for your father. Evelyn looked at Clara in amazement. And you know about him. Well, who doesn't know about him? But if you're younger, but William was a good guy. Molly, she's such a bastard. She looks like Benjamin. What's she been doing with this farm all her life? She's got herself a golden coffin or something. She couldn't let Camille go. not out of love, but because someone had to look after her farm. It can't be, Grandmother said. She just didn't want to part with us. Clara waved her hand. You can think what you like, of course, but I knew your grandmother much better than that. Never needed anyone for her but her Ethan. God damn it, every man is a piece of shit. Maybe we're in an abnormal zone here. Clara wondered. Evelyn smiled. Clara's grandmother had always loved everything unusual and otherworldly. Her daughter fought with her as much as she could. Twice they extinguished the house, because Clara lit candles from the evil power and forgot about them. All right, we managed. Once my daughter wanted to heat the stove. The frosts were fierce then. She opened the flap, and instead of a place to put firewood, there was a fresh brickwork. It's good that she didn't have time to grasp it. They broke it, and Clara too. She was making a hole in the world. Grandma was good at everything, but if something got into her head, the old lady never saw Evelyn again. She quickly got up, looked around, and authoritatively declared to herself, "That's right, abnormal. We must save the world." She walked briskly into the village. Evelyn sighed. Yes, you'll have a hard time with her. Who knows when she'll get it into her head? When Evelyn returned, the neighbor was lying on her stomach, texting on her laptop. Lisa, listen, is it real, for example, in the same social networks to find a person abroad? Of course it's real. Why do you ask? Did you find a rich relative who is ready to pay for you? Oh, come on. I just wanted to try to find one. So let's try. I've talked to my folks. I've cried, so I'm free. How much longer? 2 months, and then I'm free if I don't get any more fines. Evelyn sighed. By her calculations, she'd be working here for almost a year, and that was if there were no fines, and fines came very quickly. She pulled out a picture, showed it to Lisa, who started typing something quickly. Look, there it is. Evelyn's palms were sweating. There's what? A man with that name. Evelyn, look, he's online. Lisa, don't speak in riddles? Well, he's online now. Come on, what should I write him? Nothing, are you crazy? No, what do you mean you don't text him? You meet him for something. Evelyn remembered John, remembered her home, her whole life, and gave up. At least it's an outlet. Write, hello, William. This is Evelyn, Camille's daughter. Lisa chuckled. You're like a letter from the front. Lisa, I'll be quiet, I'll be quiet. Oh, look, I read it. Aye, she hasn't said a word yet. Probably won't answer. Evelyn lay down and was just about to doze off when Lisa pushed her. He did. That's a hell of a thing to say. Well, read it, and I'm going to go have a smoke so I don't get in the way. Evelyn looked at Lisa gratefully and sat down in front of the laptop. She read the words, wiped her tears, reread again. Lisa returned and saw Evelyn all in tears. She sighed. That's what, Mother. The laptop is on your bed, and I need to sleep. I don't want to get it tomorrow. Don't stay up too long. You have to work tomorrow, too. William apologized for not convincing Camille to go against Molly's wishes, for being resentful and not letting on for years. Then work got in the way, one thing and another. When he woke up, he decided he didn't need him anymore. Camille's been married a long time, and the daughter probably calls that man Daddy. Mom had never been married, not even one day. William was silent for a while. Evelyn thought he would never answer again. I had the thought, but then I decided that no matter how cruel Molly was, she wouldn't lie like that. So she did. Do you have a wife, kids? Evelyn, you don't have to tell me. I have no one. I tried to get married. I lasted 6 months twice, but I called my wives, Camille. And then I stopped trying. And God didn't give me children. I mean, He did, but I lost them. But it's not your fault, is it? Another long pause. It's my fault. It's always the man's fault, because he should be stronger, wiser, smarter, you know? It's all my fault. And now I'm dying. I don't have much time left, and I was still afraid to write to you. Dying? Why? There's Evelyn, a disease that doesn't look at places or people. It just goes and takes whoever it wants with it. Of course, Evelyn knew everything. She felt tears running down her cheeks. It was so hurtful, so painful to realize that she had just found her father and wouldn't even get to see him. Evelyn, why don't we video call tomorrow? Oh, I don't know how to do that. If Lisa says it's okay, she'll help you. So that's not you in the picture. No, of course I'll ask her. See you tomorrow. Evelyn has been getting reprimands all day. She got so many fines that Lisa couldn't take it anymore. She was waiting in the greenhouse next to Evelyn. What's wrong with you today? Lisa, you see, that man you found yesterday, he's my father. And Evelyn briefly told her the story of her family. Lisa exhaled. Wow, I'm sorry, your family is a mess. Evelyn, so maybe he's rich? Evelyn stared at her with an uncomprehending stare. Even if he is, which I doubt, so what? So what? He could just pay off that creep, and you'd be free. Oh, Lisa, you say that too. A man dies and I have to ask for money? We've never met. What's the big deal? You're so interesting, you're used by everyone, and you can't. I won't. If you'll let me, we'd like to talk on the video conference today. Oh, you're such an idiot. Tell me, of course. What do you want me to do? As soon as my father saw her, he cried, God, you look just like Camille. How is she? Mom's dead. Dead? And Grandma? She's gone too. They talked for almost an hour. Then they said goodbye. They're putting me in the hospital tomorrow. They won't let me die in peace. And then I'll write to you again. All right, I'll be waiting. When a crying Evelyn returned the laptop, and Lisa asked, So did you tell him about your life? No, why? You should see him, he's so sick. Oh, Evelyn, oh, stupid. Evelyn fell asleep almost immediately. She woke up in the night and saw Lisa sitting on her laptop. She even asked, What's wrong, what? Lisa jumped up. What? No, the kid has a fever. Go back to sleep. I'm going to bed too. And the workday began again. Evelyn learned to ignore the pain in her back, learned not to look at her bloody hands. She just worked and counted the days. What was the use of counting them? 5 would be taken away, 2 added for fines. Benjamin showed up from time to time. He seemed to take a special pleasure in humiliating Evelyn, probably because she was a native of the village where the oligarch himself was born and almost grew up. Evelyn, you don't look so good. Admittedly, when you lived with your husband, you looked much better. But although it's probably much better to live like behind a stone wall, and he chuckled at his own joke, Evelyn was silent. She wanted to slap his fat face, but she knew she couldn't. A week passed, then another. Every night when Lisa opened her laptop, Evelyn looked at her questioningly, but she just shook her head. Evelyn's father was no longer online. The day came when the disgruntled warden gave Lisa her papers. Everyone came out to see her off. Lisa took Evelyn aside. I'm sorry. I'm probably the reason your dad hasn't been in touch anymore. But you know, to me, it's better than no father at all. I don't know what you mean. Evelyn looked at Lisa and really didn't understand anything. Lisa sighed. The day you talked to him, I texted him back, and I told him all about your story, about your debt, about your husband, about everything. And he said he'd help, and then I guess he changed his mind. Lisa, why? Lisa shook her head. Because, is he a father or not? He's never helped you once in his life, and now he can. You may or may not be offended, but I think I did the right thing. Lisa left and Evelyn returned to her room lost. Now, even if her dad does show up online, she won't know about it. Well, then it's not fate. 7 more months ahead, no time to think and dream at all. Just before Christmas, when the main job was over and the new one was just beginning, Evelyn decided to go to the store. She had nowhere to live, of course, but Christmas is Christmas. Even the warden had gone home for the weekend, though no one could believe she had a family at all. At the store, the clerk crossed her arms when she saw Evelyn. "Evelyn, you?" "I'm Kathy." "Why are you looking at me like I'm a ghost?" "Well, Evelyn, no offense, but you've aged 20 years. "I know, Kathy, I know. Why don't you sell it to me quick before somebody else does?" "Yeah, sure." Kathy ran around the store, picking up what Evelyn was showing and talking nonstop. "What, do you work for our tycoon?" "I do, but they say he doesn't pay at all, and the people aren't happy. He evicted people from their homes, not the whole village, but only those who couldn't fight back. And he's ruined everything with his construction." Evelyn grinned. It can't be. Remember how they greeted him, almost throwing their hats in the air? Kathy looked at her. "You shouldn't say that, Evelyn. People really thought the village would be revived, but now it feels like he's a landowner and everyone else is a serf." Evelyn was silent. She knew what serfs were like. "Did you hear yours?" Evelyn was on her way out, but stopped. "Yours is playing in town." "Huh. Well, he lost a lot of money. They say he was beaten up for his debts, even hospitalized. And then our people met him. He said he was getting married. An old woman, but rich." Evelyn laughed. "Oh, John, he wants to ride a crooked mare to heaven." The mood lightened a little. Evelyn took the road she had not taken in a long time, so as not to see an empty place instead of her home. But the place was no longer empty. There was a new house, which was made under the old. She stood for a while and went on her way. She didn't even notice how a figure separated from the house and followed her. "Excuse me, could you please tell me how I can find Evelyn?" She stopped. She didn't know this man, and she'd never seen him before. In fact, he was kind of strange and dressed differently and had a fashionable haircut. "I'm Evelyn. Who are you?" "Oh, for some reason I thought it was you. You look just like your mom." He pulled out the exact same picture she had. My heart sank. "Who are you?" "My name is James. I'm your father's executor." Now Evelyn realized what confused her the most. Was this man pronouncing words too correctly, like a speech therapist or a foreigner? Is there somewhere we can talk, but out of sight? "I take it we don't need eyes on us just yet." "Well, if only on the shore, where the kids go in summer, but now there's no one there." They walked to the river. Evelyn shook the snow off the bench and sat down. "What are you doing? The bench is cold." She smiled. "I can't stand. My back really hurts." She pulled her hand out of the mitten, and the man rounded his eyes when he saw her bruised, haggard hands. "Why are you like this?" Evelyn quickly hid her hands in the mittens. "What did you want to talk to me about?" "Is Papa dead?" "Yes. William passed away 2 months ago, but in the hospital, in the presence of a notary, witnesses, he gave clear orders regarding you. We never got a chance to talk, to sit down." Evelyn wiped away a tear. "What orders?" The man sat down beside her and opened the folder. "The orders are very simple. William instructed me to give you everything he had. I suspect you won't agree to go abroad. He sold everything he had there 2 weeks before he died. All the money, All the assets and more are now yours. I, as his advisor and assistant, will stay with you for the first time. I will help you so that no one will cheat you, so that you will be able to invest the money profitably. As soon as you understand everything, I will be able to leave you. I'm aware of your problem. The first thing I suggest is that you pay off your debt, which will cause a lot of trouble for the person who dumped it on you. The second thing is to get a good night's rest and a good night's sleep, and only then do business. Evelyn stared at him in amazement. Money so much that it's enough for a debt. The man smiled. Your money is enough to pay 1,000 such debts. He couldn't stand it, he laughed. You have such a face now. William was a very wealthy man. His work was insanely valued, but he was far from the richest. So how do I get in touch with this man? Through the warden. James's eyebrows flew upwards. I'm sorry, I must have misheard you. Evelyn laughed now. Oh, now you should see your face. Let's go down the road and I'll tell you all about it. Tell me, is English your first language? Oh, my grandmother. James told her a whole story about how his grandmother had once fled America, but made her children and grandchildren speak only English at home. By the time Evelyn finished her story, they had reached the wooden structure where Wendy stood with her arms at her sides. What's up, Queen? Another fine. Evelyn wanted to start making excuses, as she usually did, but James stepped forward. I beg your pardon, who are you? Who are you? I'm Evelyn's attorney. I'd very much like to speak to the man to whom Evelyn allegedly owes money. Wendy, who hadn't even had a chance to change out of her city clothes yet, reached into her pocket for her phone. I'll call now, of course. Lawyer. Well, that's funny. Please tell Mr. Benjamin to grab his lawyer or notary. Only in the presence of two persons, we will transfer the debt to him. Wendy already looked at James in amazement and stepped farther away to explain to the owner what was the matter. The girls came out of the outbuilding. They looked at Evelyn with envy. She gave them a hug. Don't you think I'm not leaving you? James says he will take Benjamin at once, and very soon he will be where he ought to be. The girls sighed, hugged Evelyn, and asked her to come and see them, even if it didn't work out. Benjamin arrived an hour later. In that time, Evelyn and those who worked with her had time to decorate the Christmas tree in the yard. Strangely, Wendy didn't even chase the others away to work. She sat and quietly pondered whether she should run away already or whether she could still work. Who's so wealthy around here? James stood up. Good afternoon. I'm Evelyn's attorney. She'd like to pay you some money. You, in turn, must give a receipt and write that you have no claims against her. Oh, I can't believe it, Evelyn. Are you a foreigner or something? That's right. I was Evelyn's father's attorney and trustee, and now I'm helping Evelyn with what's called an inheritance, and the big inheritance. Benjamin's smile faded a little. He remembered those conversations from his childhood, when adults had said that Evelyn had a father abroad, but no one knew for sure, and it turned out to be true. The inheritance, apparently, is not bad at all, since even from there the man flew. After 2 o'clock, Benjamin, sweating, looked at the departing couple. The man who had come with him said, "Oh, Benjamin, the guy is very competent. He can twist this receipt so that you will not feel bad. If I were you, I'd wrap it up real quick and sit tight." No way. I was not born to be told what to do by Benjamin. The man shook his head. Well, that's for you to say. It's my business to warn you. And yes, and I'm sorry, I can't work with you anymore. I don't feel like sitting down for company. He got into his car and drove away quickly. Benjamin turned around and saw the women who worked for him, or rather worked off their debts. What are you looking at? You can leave, but only temporarily. Whoever wants to can continue working. The salary is twice as much. After 20 minutes, he and Wendy were the only ones left. Wendy took out a travel bag. You, Benjamin, have calculated me. I'm going too. He looked at her angrily. Well, you'll get around. You have to work, and you're running away. Well, I'll get by. I think the journalists in our town would be very interested to hear me. Wendy laughed. She very rarely laughed, and rightly so. Her laughter was like the bleating of a goat. Benjamin threw a wad of money on the table and walked out. James brought Evelyn to the most beautiful hotel in town. This is your room. Mine is across the hall. You get some rest and sleep, and I'll be there, say 5 o'clock. We'll order dinner, and I'll give you everything. And then we'll figure it out as we go along. Okay. Thank you very much. She didn't get much sleep. She took a bath, dried her hair, thought about buying some cream. Her hands were sore. Her skin chapped from work. Decided that later, tonight to rest, but she never got to sleep. In the evening, James handed her a card. This is your card. It's automatic. You can use it to pay for anything you want. Here's the paperwork. It's new. I haven't activated it yet. This is what you need to read. Here's the patent information. You are now the owner of a brand of healing equipment. When you get up to speed, you'll need to renegotiate with some of the companies that manufacture them. Evelyn looked at him with those eyes. Don't be afraid of anything. You'll figure it all out, and I'll help you. You have very tired eyes. I suggest we split up and go to bed. And tomorrow, you could go to the barber shop. I don't know. What else do women need to be happy? All the business can wait. Thank you, James. Can I ask you a question? Yes, of course. You're here with me, but I suppose you have a family waiting for you at home? He froze for a second. No, my family died. My wife and young son were killed in the mountains. I didn't want to live either. If it weren't for your father, we wouldn't be talking right now. Please forgive me. It's okay. You didn't know. Good night to you. To be honest, Evelyn was even a little tired of having fun. In the morning, while James was probably asleep, she quietly left the room. Through the night, she slept like she was a carefree infant. She waved for a cab. The car immediately stopped in front of her. Where are we going? Do you know where we have expensive, fashionable clothing stores in the city? The elderly man smiled. I know everything. 15 minutes later, he stopped at a magician's shop. He's so handsome. She paid the cab driver and went inside. A woman immediately approached her. What are you interested in? Evelyn looked around and answered with a smile. Everything. The woman raised an eyebrow, immediately snapped her fingers, and 2 young girls appeared beside her. Cindy, lingerie, Kelly, dress and suits, and I'll take care of outerwear. 2 o'clock Evelyn was like being in a fashion show. She tried on so many things. Most she put off to buy. One outfit, a pantsuit paired with a short mink coat she really liked. The woman who met her suddenly said, "Wait, you can't go outside in those shoes." She quickly dialed someone's number. And already in 10 minutes, Evelyn did not even have time to finish her coffee. A girl with several boxes appeared in the store. Now we're all set. Do you want your clothes packed? Can you throw them away? The woman smiled. With great pleasure. There's a great beauty parlor nearby. The owner is a friend of mine. If you want, I'll call and ask to be taken off the waiting list. Oh, thank you. I'd love to. The beauty parlor was literally 2 houses down. Next to the entrance to the salon where the grocery store entrance was, Evelyn smiled to herself. A year ago, she would have chosen that entrance. John had been stomping outside the store for an hour now. What kind of person was Miranda? She'd gone to get something nice for dinner and had been at the store for an hour. On the one hand, it's good, because I don't have to listen to her stupid jokes and endure her endless touching. On the other hand, I can't leave. Miranda already bought him a car. It may not be the most expensive, but John's never had one. And she promised that if he behaved well, she'd pay off his debt. It wasn't a huge debt, but John had nowhere to get it, and they could beat his head off for it. So he was on his best behavior, trying to do his best. "John, are you there?" He turned around sharply. Oh, how he hated unexpected meetings with acquaintances, because most of them owed him money. "Kathy?" "Hi." It was just the clerk from the village store. "You didn't come to the city from your village, did you?" "Yeah, I did. I need to pick up a few things." "Yeah, there's nothing in the village." Kathy took a look at the car. "I see you bought a car." John grimaced. "Oh, don't. Evelyn works there, and you're so bad." "It's not my fault Benjamin picked it out." Kathy raised an eyebrow in surprise. "I wasn't going to. And Evelyn's not working. She paid that Benjamin, and she's free to go. In fact, her lawyer made such a mess of it that he shut his company down in a flash." "Kathy, are you confused?" "What's her lawyer?" "Where from?" "Oh, you probably don't know anything. Evelyn's father turned up and died. And he lived abroad. He was a millionaire, even more. So now Evelyn is the heiress to the whole fortune." "You're lying." "I didn't think so. The women who worked there told me that her lawyer said she'd put everyone in jail and buy them all." Kathy was pleased with the effect it had. Of course, no Broads had said anything, but let the creep know. Kathy went about her business, and John wondered, what does that mean? His wife is like a cheese and butter, and he has to live with an old woman to get by on a trifle. It's not right. What we need to do is this. We've got to get back to Evelyn. John's mind was already churning with the most fantastic ideas. He turned around and became numb. A cab that had stopped nearby was being driven by a woman. Or rather, it wasn't a woman, it was a queen. Expensive fur coat, hairdo, high-heeled boots. John rubbed his eyes. No, there could be no mistake. It was Evelyn. While he was thinking, the cab drove off, taking his wife with it. "Oh, you weren't lying, Kathy." Before he could think, a shrill voice came from across the street. "John! John, why are you standing there like a statue? Or do you think I'm going to carry the bags myself to feed you?" John jerked and turned around. His Miranda was standing on the front porch of the store. Fat, 15 years older than him, wealthy, as he now realized, very relatively, wealthy Miranda. "What are you looking at? Get the bags." John saw how passers-by paid attention to them, how they smiled. He moved towards Miranda, walked over, pulled out his car keys and threw them at her. "Fuck you. Find yourself another asshole." "What?" "You've got some nerve. You won't get a dime. You can get your ass cut off in the back alley for debt." But John was already striding down the street, thinking how he could find out where Evelyn was. Certainly not in the village. She's got nowhere to live. Oh, I should have asked Kathy more. John had to go to the village. He even had to spend the night at a neighbor's house. But in 3 days he had gathered all the information he needed. The only thing left was to borrow money for flowers. He couldn't go to his wife empty-handed, could he? Evelyn studied the papers. For the past hour, she had been familiarizing herself with the techniques that helped people get back on their feet. It was confusing at first, then interesting, and by the end of the reading, she was sure it was a real miracle. She had even read many testimonials when even those who were considered hopeless started walking. I mean, it's so necessary, but I understand it's all just overseas. Yes, there is something like that here, but only in the capital. Evelyn thought for a moment. James, correct me if I'm wrong, if such a hospital is located in nature, but, for example, in our village, it would be more useful, wouldn't it? The man smiled faintly. What can I say? Well done. Immediately grasped the essence, all thought out. Of course, you see, without walks, sunbaths, and all that, the treatment is much longer. It's a pity Benjamin took our village. We have such nature there. You know, Evelyn, you and I are alike after all. I really liked it there too. Everything is so real, so natural, isn't it? And Benjamin, perhaps it's time to take care of him. You know, to free the village from his yoke. Is that possible? Nothing is impossible in this world, especially if you have money. By the way, I've looked at the location of the houses. It would make a great hospital, where the strongest of the world can improve their health. And that's money, and that's a lot of money, and that's jobs. James, if we do it, we'll be the biggest smarties of all. He smiled. After Evelyn had returned from her girls' camping trip, he had not recognized her at first. When he did, he was confused. She couldn't have been that beautiful. When he realized she could have been, he finally died. Now the most important thing was not to show her how he felt about her, because it would turn out that he had come along with the money to the Harris. They discussed some details, and James went to his room. The phone rang. Evelyn, there's a man here asking for you. He's dying to see you. Who? It's your husband. My what? My husband. I'll be right down. You can't let him in here. She left the room and ran into James. Evelyn, your face is gone. What happened? Nothing, I'm fine. And she walked briskly toward the elevator. James stood for a moment and followed. What's going on? He's supposed to be guarding her. He immediately recognized the man who tried to hug Evelyn. She pushed his arms away. John, what do you want? How dare you show your face to me? Evelyn, I'm your husband. This is a temporary thing. I've already filed for an annulment. What annulment? I'll show you. The sound of breaking glass rang in John's head. No, he won't give up his dream. Evelyn is his wife. When he dresses up, he'll look cool too. He won't invent something so simple. He'll invent something worthwhile because they have money. Evelyn, you just don't realize what the future holds. What future? Do you want me to tell you? I don't. And don't even come near me. You're nothing but trouble, John. Learn to live on your own. I don't get it. Are you serious? Yeah, I'm dead serious. John grinned wickedly. You mean you need John to get you out of the mud, but you don't need John to get you out of the money? I repaid you handsomely. In case you haven't forgotten, I've been working off your debt. You gave me away just like a thing so that I could earn money for your entertainment. John couldn't take it anymore. You shouldn't have done that. I was getting ready. I bought flowers. Who needs you like that? You can't even have children. You're an inferior. Evelyn looked at him. If anyone in this life is incomplete, it's you. John didn't realize how it happened. It was just so painful to realize that nothing would change, that he would not be able to live a beautiful and rich life. And he already had so many images in his head. He hit Evelyn and swung again. All the hurt and pain was in his fist. John wanted to cry, and she was to blame for everything. It didn't work the second time. Some man kicked him so hard that John bent down and gulped for a long time. Hotel staff rushed to them, and someone called the police. 2 weeks later, Evelyn and James arrived in the village. Benjamin had been taken into custody by people who were competent in the matter. He was in more trouble than you could count. Nancy had not left the house at all. Benjamin owed wages to the whole village. Evelyn knew perfectly well that she had to talk to the people. Rumors were circulating, but people didn't know what was what, and that was why they were so gloomy. The village people, who had always preferred stability and dimensionality, were very frightened when a large crowd gathered near their car. Evelyn spoke up. The only thing left was to borrow money for flowers. He couldn't go to his wife empty-handed, could he? Evelyn studied the papers. For the past hour, she had been familiarizing herself with the techniques that helped people get back on their feet. It was confusing at first, then interesting, and by the end of the reading, she was sure it was a real miracle. She had even read many testimonials when even those who were considered hopeless started walking. I mean, it's so necessary, but I understand it's all just overseas. Yes, there is something like that here, but only in the capital. Evelyn thought for a moment. James, correct me if I'm wrong, if such a hospital is located in nature, but, for example, in our village, it would be more useful, wouldn't it? The man smiled faintly. What can I say? Well done. Immediately grasped the essence, all thought out. Of course. You see, without walks, sunbaths, and all that, the treatment is much longer. It's a pity Benjamin took our village. We have such nature there. You know, Evelyn, you and I are alike after all. I really liked it there too. Everything is so real, so natural, isn't it? And Benjamin, perhaps it's time to take care of him. You know, to free the village from his yoke. Is that possible? Nothing is impossible in this world, especially if you have money. By the way, I looked at the location of the houses. It would make a great hospital, where the strongest of the world can improve their health. And that's money, and that's a lot of money, and that's jobs. James, if we do it, we'll be the biggest smarties of all. He smiled. After Evelyn had returned from her girls' camping trip, he had not recognized her at first. When he did, he was confused. She couldn't have been that beautiful. When he realized she could have been, he finally died. Now, the most important thing was not to show her how he felt about her, because it would turn out that he had come along with the money to the heiress. They discussed some details, and James went to his room. The phone rang. Evelyn, there's a man here asking for you. He's dying to see you. Who? It's your husband. My what? My husband. I'll be right down. You can't let him in here. She left the room and ran into James. Evelyn, your face is gone. What happened? Nothing, I'm fine. And she walked briskly toward the elevator. James stood for a moment and followed. What's going on? He's supposed to be guarding her. He immediately recognized the man who tried to hug Evelyn. She pushed his arms away. John, what do you want? How dare you show your face to me? Evelyn, I'm your husband. This is a temporary thing. I've already filed for an annulment. What annulment? I'll show you. The sound of breaking glass rang in John's head. No, he won't give up his dream. Evelyn is his wife. When he dresses up, he'll look cool too. He won't invent something so simple. He'll invent something worthwhile because they have money. Evelyn, you just don't realize what the future holds. What future? Do you want me to tell you? I don't. And don't even come near me. You're nothing but trouble, John. Learn to live on your own. I don't get it. Are you serious? Yeah, I'm dead serious. John grinned wickedly. You mean you need John to get you out of the mud, but you don't need John to get you out of the money? I repaid you handsomely. In case you haven't forgotten, I've been working off your debt. You gave me away just like a thing so that I could earn money for your entertainment. John couldn't take it anymore. You shouldn't have done that. I was getting ready. I bought flowers. Who needs you like that? You can't even have children. You're inferior. Evelyn looked at him. If anyone in this life is incomplete, it's you. John didn't realize how it happened. It was just so painful to realize that nothing would change, that he would not be able to live a beautiful and rich life. And he already had so many images in his head. He hit Evelyn and swung again. All the hurt and pain was in his fist. John wanted to cry, and she was to blame for everything. It didn't work the second time. Some man kicked him so hard that John bent down and gulped for a long time. Hotel staff rushed to them, and someone called the police. 2 weeks later, Evelyn and James arrived in the village. Benjamin had been taken into custody by people who were competent in the matter. He was in more trouble than you could count. Nancy had not left the house at all. Benjamin owed wages to the whole village. Evelyn knew perfectly well that she had to talk to the people. Rumors were circulating, but people didn't know what was what, and that was why they were so gloomy. The village people, who had always preferred stability and dimensionality, were very frightened when a large crowd gathered near their car. Evelyn spoke up. You all have known me since I was a little girl. I've never slacked off, never did a bad thing. And most importantly, I loved our village. I'll answer the most important questions right away. Yes, I received an inheritance. Yes, I bought back from Benjamin everything he had bought here. The crowd erupted in amazement. Wow, so now you're going to put up a factory too? Evelyn smiled. No, I wanted to consult with you. The people waited tensely. She handed out little books to everyone about the technique for the sick and told them at the same time. We can save all the nature, make a name for ourselves, make a lot of jobs. If you all say no, nothing will happen. I promise you. There was no arguing. Grandfather Mason, who was the oldest in the village, came out to the people and said, I think we can trust Evelyn. If it's true, our village will be famous all over the world. When we got back to town, we decided that we should celebrate the beginning of a successful business. James was a little too gloomy. What's the matter with you? You don't seem happy about our success. Of course I am. Except I realized one thing today. You don't need me anymore. You can do this on your own. I can leave. When we got back, I booked a ticket, leaving in the morning. Evelyn realized it was bound to happen sooner or later. But why now? Why not later someday? She could see she liked him. She couldn't let him go. James? Yes. James, could you reschedule the flight? Reschedule? Do you still need me here? Yes, I do. He shrugged. Well, he would suffer for her a little longer. It was unbearable to be around the person he was about to lose. All right, what time do you want to reschedule the flight? He picked up the phone. In the next life. In this one, I'm not letting you go. James slowly raised his eyes to her, looked at her for a long time, then said, And I don't want you to think I stayed for the money. I don't, but everyone will think so. Do you care what everyone else thinks? James smiled. Evelyn, you're just scared. You don't love me, do you? Do you? And then he blushed. And I do, but... Then I'll drop everything and come with you. In a second, Evelyn was in James's arms. He kissed her and repeated, I've had one desire lately, to kiss you. Now for the rest of your life you'll have to put up with me around you. And I agree. Evelyn laughed happily.